Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Portland Board of Public Education's meeting. We're beginning tonight with a brief meeting of our nominations committee, which is a committee of the whole. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
In 1 second, I was timed out, so my apologies.
Sorry?
We have to do the roll call first. Sorry about that. Okay, Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Russell Better.
Here.
Ms. Biliu. Mr. Youssef. Here. Ms. Aswami. Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Alzamili. Ms. Santiago. Ms. Diu.
Present.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. Thank you so much. So we have 2 items of business in our nominations committee. First is the nomination of Sarah Thompson to fill an open community member seat on the district level building advisory committee, which helps us oversee the renovation of our 4 elementary schools. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell Better, seconded by Board Member Burke. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. So the governance for the district advisory building committee is set at 11 members, of which 3 are school board members and 2 are city councilors, and the remaining 6 are members of the public. The elected officials are appointed by the Board of Education, so you will be asked to do that today upon recommendation of the board chair. And the councilors are selected by the board chair in consultation with the city council. The committee is co-chaired by one of the members of the school board selected by the board chair from among the sitting board representatives on the building committee, and co-chaired by a member of the council who's also selected by the board chair. The 6 members of the public are at large, and they continue to serve on the committee for as long as they remain residents in Portland. When there's a vacancy among members of the public, that vacancy is filled by someone who is forwarded to the board by the board's appointments committee. So, as you know, later today during the business part of the meeting, you will be acting on recommendations for co-chair and for a new co-chair, for someone to fill the city councilor, one of the city councilor vacancies. And also what you're being asked to do right now as part of this committee is to approve the replacement of an outgoing board DABC member, Mr. Brad Post, who resigned back in November, and Ms. Thompson, who, as all of you know, is a former board member and also served as the co-chair, the board representative co-chair on the DABC for a number of years, is the person that we are bringing to the committee today to approve the appointment. The process is that the appointments committee has to make the recommendation first to the board. So that's why we convened first as an appointments committee, in order to be able to make that appointment, and then hopefully, assuming that's approved, bring it to the full board during the business meeting in a little bit. So that's
excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Given that we do have members of the public with us, if there's anyone who's joined us tonight, who's a member of the public who wants to speak to this nomination, again, we're nominating Sarah Thompson to fill an open community seat on the district level building advisory committee. If you are interested in speaking to the board on this nomination, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and I will go ahead and call on you. Okay, I don't see any public comment, so we're going to move on to a vote. So all in favor of nominating Sarah Thompson to fill the open community member seat on the district level building advisory committee, please indicate just with a show of hands. It's unanimous with the students voting with the majority. And so we will consider Sarah's nomination during our business committee and formally have a chance to vote on it then. Now, the second item of business for this nominations committee tonight is the nomination of community members to serve as members of the newly formed district-wide building level advisory committee. Is there a motion?
I move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this or do you want me to?
You can if you want. I could do it as well. So.
Okay, I will, as a reminder, we have consolidated our 4 individual building level advisory committees that have worked directly with the school communities to advise the district level advisory committee and the school board on the individual school renovation projects. And for efficiency and because of the phase of the projects that we're currently at, we decided to consolidate the committees into one. And over the last several weeks, I've connected with every member of those individual building committees, every community member who has been serving on those committees so that's committee members for the Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki building level advisory committees to see if they're interested in now serving on this district-wide committee. And I'm grateful that 3 or 4 members from each individual building level advisory committee wants to serve on the district-wide committee, which is just what we are aiming for and just the criteria that we set in creating this new committee. So I'll just run through who the committee members are. So from the Reiki Building Level Advisory Committee, we have Lauren Rosenberg, Jeremy Dean, and Matthew Peters. From the Longfellow Building Level Advisory Committee, we have Bill Dodson, Eva Humanek, Luke Truman, and Jeff Levine. And then from the Presumpscot Building Level Advisory Committee, we have Elizabeth LaPierre, Laura Fries, and Sarah McMath. So again, these are community members who have been serving on their individual school building level advisory committees who are now wanting to serve on the district-wide committee. So are there any questions or discussion?
Just let me add,
Yes,
I think for the committee, these folks all went through vetting previously when they were originally appointed to the building level advisory committees for each of those groups. So they have gone through, vetting at the committee level before, and obviously by the board as well.
Any questions or discussion? Okay, let's again move to public comment. So this is public comment. If any members of the public are interested in commenting on the slate of nominations to the new district-wide building level advisory committee, please indicate by using the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so we're going to close public comment and just move to a vote. So just with a show of hands, all in favor of these nominations for filling the community seats on the reconstituted building level advisory committee, please indicate. Great, it is unanimous. So that concludes our work tonight as the nominating committee. So now I'd like to call to order the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is January 18th, 2022. And we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining via Zoom. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke,
Here.
Ms. Russell Better,
Here.
Ms. Biliou,
Here.
Mr. Youssef,
Here.
Ms. Aswami,
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Alzamili, Ms. Santiago,
Here.
Ms. Diu,
Present.
and Chair Figdor.
Here. Okay, I just want to note that Ms. Bondo is again traveling and joining us from away. So Ms. Bondo, thank you so much for all you are doing to be able to join us tonight. We're really grateful for that. And with that, we are going to do the pledge. So please, please join me. Pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. Okay, so tonight, as is customary, we're going to start our business meeting with a public comment period. This is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on any issue that we are not voting on tonight. For issues that we're voting on, there'll be an opportunity for the public to comment as we get to that agenda item. So if you're a member of the public and you would like to comment tonight, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any public comments, so I'm going to go ahead.
We have somebody.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
virtual
I'm so sorry.
present. So this is actually my first school board meeting.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to ask if you can introduce yourself and say where you live, and then you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, absolutely. My name is John Rousseau. So I live at 1455 Riverton Road here in Portland. So I come before the board tonight to learn more about what is going on in the public education sector. So I have a daughter that attends here at Casco Bay, and recently she partook in some activities with her school that I did not agree with. So I'm here to learn and understand how decisions are made and passed down to the educators.
Thank you for being here tonight.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to check any hands on Zoom again. I don't see any, so now I will actually close public comment. And we are going to move to the report of the chair. I hope that yesterday was a day of reflection for everyone, but also a commitment to action, a renewed commitment to action, and especially for white people like myself. I want to read a quote by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. That he wrote as part of his letter from Birmingham jail. And I apologize, I might have read this last year because this is my favorite MLK quote, but I think regardless, and I meant to check, but I did not, regardless, it is something we all need to hear and remind ourselves of. So this is part of his letter. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to quote unquote order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, quote, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, end quote. Who paternalistically feels he can set a timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who consistently advises the Negro to wait until a, quote, more convenient season, end quote. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. End quote. So I want to challenge us as a board and a community to be courageous in the coming year and to take bold action to help bend the arc and create the kind of world that King dreamed about but did not live to see. The other issue I want to discuss tonight is the pandemic. Over the last 2 weeks with Omicron, our cases have been higher, far higher than at any point in the pandemic. And that's because cases are so high in the community. I am very proud of our team that we've had very minimal closures, a grade or program at an individual school. So it's so important that our students remain learning in person. And I just want to express my tremendous gratitude to the superintendent, to his team, and to all of our staff who are keeping school open and our students safe and learning. And lastly, tonight, I am appointing board member Oral Russell-Better and Councillor Pius Ali to serve as co-chairs for the new district-wide building level advisory committee. I want to thank Ms. Russell-Better, who's here tonight, for her service, and she's perfect in serving in this role, having been involved in passing the bond that led to Presumpscot and the other 3 schools being renovated, and being a community member who's very close to the work that's being done. So Ms. Russell-Better, I'm so excited that you're taking on this role, and thank you. And that is it for my remarks tonight. We don't have a student report tonight due to an illness, so we are moving right into the report of the superintendent. Superintendent Batana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, as you know, was the annual holiday remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King's life and work. Dr. King's work continues to be an inspiration for our efforts to make the Portland Public Schools a more equitable and just place. I hope that everyone was able to take a moment to reflect on how we can individually contribute to that mission in our own life and work. Later today, we will be featuring some of the work that we're doing to build our capacity to become a more equitable and just school system, both in our equity cohort training and in our recent listening sessions with our LatinX families and students. Additionally, my monthly forecaster column highlights our curriculum work to work with students, staff, and community partners to develop African American studies curricula. We had our second snow day of the year on Friday, January 7th. With that, the last day of student attendance for the year is Monday, June 13th. And the final day of the school year for school year only staff is Tuesday, June 14th. Somebody just panicked there, I'm sure. As you know, we intend to have the first 3 inclement weather days be traditional snow days. And after that, if we have sufficient warning, we will plan a remote instructional day. Those days will be considered student attendance days, and therefore they will not need to be made up at the end of the school year. I would like to recognize Betsy Bas-Jamesi, who was recognized earlier today by the Maine Department of Education as one of 11 classified school employees across the state, highlighted as RISE awardees for their exemplary efforts to further and advance the work of their school systems. We congratulate all of the honorees for their important contributions. Betsy, and I don't know, is Betsy with us?
I am.
Yeah. Wonderful. Betsy, good to see you. Betsy was also named one of the 2 finalists advanced by the Maine Department of Education to a national competition with another 2 finalists from every other state. Betsy, as most of you know, is a tremendous resource to our district. Her work with the Latinx community is exemplary. You will see some of the work featured later as I share the results from our focus group sessions with our Latinx families and students this fall. Betsy was a key convener and session facilitator. Betsy received her award earlier today outside East End Community School. I think we're still chilly from that. And she will now be competing at the national level and will learn the outcome of that competition sometime in the next month. Betsy's already a winner. And while I can only imagine that what other worthy finalists may contribute to their districts, I struggle to think that there can be anyone who's more central to their district success than Betsy is to ours. She exemplifies what our family engagement specialists mean to our district's work. Thank you, Betsy, for your commitment and your dedication to our students, to our families, and to the district.
Thank you very, very much. I am very honored to receive this recognition. And like I said earlier, I truly am grateful for having a job that I can make a difference and that I truly, truly love to go to every day. So thank you once again for all of your support and all of your wonderful words. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. This week is the deadline for school choice applications. Because of the high level of attention and focus we've all been dedicating to something called COVID, we extended the deadline for applications to Casco Bay High School to the end of this week. It was originally to be today. We expect to stay on track to have school selection completed by the beginning of February. I wanted to let you know that Portland High School will be providing a substantive number of students who are currently short of meeting standards an opportunity to make up missing work and meet course standards prior to the end of the semester. On Wednesday, January 26th, qualifying students will be expected to attend this day, while other students will be excused for the day, which incidentally would have been an early release day for them. The school hopes that this move towards a proficiency-based approach will allow more students to meet course requirements as the fall semester comes to an end. Special education programming will continue during that day, and students wanting school meals will be able to pick them up on Tuesday prior to leaving or on Wednesday outside of PHS. Deering is doing similar work by changing their advisories this and next week to allow for more learning center time for students who need additional support in order to meet course standards. I would now like to begin our regular update on how we're working to keep our schools open, safe, and healthy. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on the school reopening plans at board meetings. Today, we're going to update you on our case counts, including how we're tracking those cases to determine whether we remain safe. Whether we remain safe to hold in-person school, and update you on school closures to date. We will also talk about changes in our standard operating procedures and protocols resulting from changes to state and federal health guidelines. And finally, we'll talk about mandatory testing for non-vaccinated staff and the status of distributing high-quality masks to our staff. Okay, so we experienced a small increase in cases with respect to the previous week, and this is largely consistent with the prevalence of cases in the community. We're carefully tracking our staffing, attendance, and potential for in-school spread as key data points for our decision-making. And I would like to walk you through some of the data. So first, around staffing, we are tracking staff attendance holistically, looking at a variety of measures that we're going to be showing you some examples of. We're primarily focused on our teachers and ed techs and their availability. And the reason for that, obviously, is that, our ability to keep, staff in classrooms is fundamental. And our ed techs tend to be the first line of additional support when we cannot find sufficient substitutes to come in. So we're also tracking whether attendance is related to COVID or other reasons. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, as I said, we're trying to do this holistically. So we have a significant amount of data, but we also want to know what is happening on the ground. So part of our routine includes validating our information with our school leaders, so with our principals and school leaders, to ensure that they have the ability to provide sufficient classroom coverage. So let's walk through some of the data that we have. So this is a look at by school, how many staff are in each school. So obviously this is an important measure for us to then understand what the numbers are. So, 14 people absent at Deering is different from 14 people absent at Lyseth. And so this is, this serves as a denominator for much of what you will see next, and also an important indicator for us of, what our capacity is at each of those schools. Next slide, Erin. So we're tracking as a district what the overall percentage of absences are. And so this particular slide shows you what our percent of staff absent district-wide has been for the past week. And so you can see that, it hovered around, or I'm sorry, not the past week, for this month so far. So it hovered around the 10% for the first week. That number on the 7th is the day that we had a snow day. So those were, where people had already requested the day for different reasons. And then last week it climbed at the beginning of the week, and then again towards the end of the week. This is at the district level. We also track individual schools. So we also track by individual, by employee type. I mentioned that we were looking specifically at teachers and ed tech. So in these lines, you can see the teacher bar is the orange line and the blue line is ed techs. And so you can see I believe this is the actual number of absences on those particular days district-wide. Friday was a dramatically bad day for us. Obviously, it was the sort of the crescendo of, the entire week, but also it was, a Friday before a Monday holiday. So those tend to be bad days for us in general. So, as much as it was not a good day, it was not to be, we weren't tremendously surprised by that. And then we also, as I said, we track it by the school level. And so, this is an example. I believe this is Lincoln Middle School, where we did see a very, very steep increase. And, I know on Friday that it was all hands on deck at Lincoln. So again, this is I believe that's it. Do we have something? Oh, we have one more that just shows the sort of overall for the month of January, what the reason is for those absences. And so we've grouped, all of the illness related, personal illness and separate from family illness. And you can see that makes up the overwhelming majority of the reasons why folks are absent. And then, there's a smattering of other things that are also in there. So again, we try to look at this holistically. We have a significant amount of data, but, on an ongoing basis, we are in contact with our principals to ensure that they have the ability to provide sufficient coverage to be able to keep our students productively learning. And so that brings us to the next area that we are tracking, which is our student attendance. Again, on this one, I'd like to say at the onset that, as I think you heard Chair Figdor say, we have a clear, commitment and belief that having students learning in person is, the most important thing that we can do. And so, in looking at these data, while they are, attendance is not what it normally is, I do want to, emphasize that, that we are seeing in general that, 8 out of 10 students, are in school. And so that is that's a very significant number of students. And so we believe that we are providing an important service to our students and to our community by keeping our schools open, while at the same time trying to be thoughtful about, cases where it no longer becomes productive. So this is broken out by elementary and then, middle school and high schools. And so you can see, and I believe this was the week leading up to the Christmas, the winter break. So this is what you're looking at here, and then this is what has transpired since the break. So again, you can see that our numbers in general across all three of those groups are lower. The overall average is 83%, where it was somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 90% or 90% the week before the break. And you see, using the Friday data again, the peak of the increasing cases over the past couple of weeks, and also the Friday before a holiday, that, we have seen significant decreases in our elementary attendance, somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 percentage points over the past, since before the break, and of almost 10 percentage points for our middle schools in that same period of time. So a fairly significant decrease, but again, our average is, better than 8 out of 10 students are in school every day. I think, and this is, obviously a very busy graph. This is, again, we can also track it at the individual school level. So we're able to see, patterns in our schools over time. So you can see, this is the period of time leading up to the winter break, and then the data for the past couple of weeks since we've been back from break. And so you can see, again, that in general, that our attendance has dropped in some cases, fairly dramatically in, over the past week. So that's the trend. Again, we have been, we had a significant conversation with our school leaders early on, where we, just posed the question, at what point does it make sense for us to not have students learning in person based on attendance? And it was nearly unanimous that we should not do that as a universal, unless there is an absolutely health-based reason to do that, that it is far more productive for our students to actually be in school learning whenever that's possible. So again, we're looking at this data and, tracking it carefully. And so the final aspect of what we're looking at is just the presence of COVID in our midst. And so, to this end, we're really trying to look at ourselves against the community trends. And, over the past couple of weeks, we met with our medical team, and subsequently with a pair of epidemiologists from Maine Med to talk about what are some of the valid ways in which we might be able to look at our data. And so, we really are trying to do it from two specific angles. First is just looking at ourselves against the community. Does it look like, we're peaking when the community is dropping, or something along those lines? And we have a slide to sort of illustrate that. Not, like what, it's not sort of the percentage of, the cases that we represent and how that changes, but just in general, do you see like a line that is going in a different direction? And then the other one is really trying to look at sort of school by school, classroom by classroom. What are the, what is the level of COVID that we're seeing in those classrooms as a way to sort of be able to discern whether in some cases we may be seeing a critical mass of cases that would suggest that we should go remotely. And so, last week, that we actually closed a handful of classrooms across the district. In those cases, it was primarily driven by staffing issues. And then this week, we have another handful of classrooms that are remote, again, as part of our analysis of all of these data points, discussions with principals, and then decisions that have been made. So starting with those trend lines. So the top trend line is, our data. And I think this was pulled maybe last Tuesday after we had met with our medical team and with the Maine Med team. And then what you can see again is that those patterns seem to be, consistent with each other. That you can see, as small as our caseload was in November and December, that where ours, jumped slightly, it was also connected to jumps in the Cumberland County data, which is what you see reflected in the bottom. And then obviously you can see that the ice pick, climb there, which again, this was pulled on Tuesday. We're going to talk shortly about the overall prevalence of cases. We did not see a sharp decrease in our cases last week, even though this slide suggests that. But again, it's, this was taken on a Tuesday and it's a week, up to that point. So this is, those were the numbers last week up until Tuesday. They wound up being, fairly consistent with what they had been the previous year. So flat. A flattening of that.
And that would be the same for the Cumberland County data.
I believe, yes. We've not pulled it again, but I know I track it, on an ongoing basis. But yes, that's so this here gives you the overall picture on the number of cases that we've had over the past 2 weeks. These are just student cases. I know that they're slightly different from the reports that, that we put out on our weekly COVID update. And that's because that's broader. That includes all of our staff, where this is only student level cases. And so you can see that there was about a 10% increase in cases from the previous week. So it wasn't a continue of that spike. It was more of a leveling of our cases, of a flattening of that line. We've also looked at our pools, and here the data is a little more concerning. So if you look at our first week against our second week, you can see the total number of pools that we had, the total number of pools that were positive, and what percentage of pools were positive. As you can see, a smaller number of pools in the second week. That's primarily from students being pulled out of the pools, or participants being pulled out of the pools that had previously tested positive and are no longer pool testing for 90 days. And so a smaller number of pools and a larger number of positive pools during that time frame. And then, so we've isolated from those pools the ones that are actually connected to homeroom in the elementary and the middle school. So you can see the number of elementary and the number of middle school pools that we had. And then the number of those pools that actually had cases So you can see that that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of the middle school pools and, a slightly smaller percentage of, a slightly larger percentage of the elementary pools. Of those, we looked at the ones that had at least 2 cases. And so you can see that, the overwhelming majority of those pools actually had, more than a single case. So, again, 2 weeks of pools and, the majority of them have at least 2 cases. And then we really tried to get a little bit deeper to look at how many of them, and this is particularly with an eye to looking at whether we should be thinking about the potential of in-school spread. And that's where you can see that there are very, it's a relatively small number of our pools that actually have a large number of positives in those pools. So we looked at 5 or more, and that was because that was, twice the average of the number of positives that were in in our pools overall. So 2 being that, and then we looked at what would be double of that, and so that's what we keyed in on. We also looked at how many of the pools had positives 2 weeks in a row. Again, these are not necessarily fixed pools because some students are, getting pulled out. Pools are being consolidated when there are not enough students left in a pool. That's why you see a smaller number of pools from one week to the other. But we had, 56 elementary pools that had two weeks in a row where they had a positive, and then 28 in the middle school. But then we also looked at how many of those pools actually saw an increase. So these are cases that had 2 consecutive weeks and more than a composite of 5 total positives over those 2 weeks. And that's a relatively small number of pools that actually that met that criteria. So again, that gave us generally reassurance that we are not seeing a large number of, consistent, cases being located within pools. So we found 11 classrooms at the elementary and 1 at the middle school where you both had positives. You had positives 2 weeks in a row. You had more than 5, and the number actually increased. So it went from 1 to 6, or it went from 2 to 5, or something along those lines. So if they had gone from, 4 the first week to 1 the following week, those were obviously not in the mix. And so based on that, we identified a number of classrooms, and those are on the next slide. So, and these are the classrooms that we looked at carefully in conjunction with the school leaders and made decisions about sending those classrooms remote for this week. And so as a result of that, we closed 2 out of the 3 classrooms at Talbot, the classroom at Rowe, and all 3 of the classrooms at Lyseth. Ocean Avenue is an interesting example of how this plays out differently, where when we actually talked to the principal about that situation, in all of those instances, they were able to identify, siblings or other causes for why those numbers had gone up in those classrooms. And so we made the decision in conjunction with the school not to put those classrooms into remote for this week. So I think that's it on the data slides. As I said, we did some closures last week. We did some closures again this week, in addition to the ones that you saw there. St. Elizabeth's Partnership Pre-Kindergarten is also closed this week for similar reasons, increase of cases over 2 weeks. We'll continue to look at our case counts, our staffing levels, and make decisions about continuity of instruction based on those data points that you saw. So should I move on and finish the report, or did you want to ask questions about the data before we move into the next two things, which are changes in district protocols and updates on mandatory testing and mask availability? It's a relatively short remainder of the report, but I don't want to go on if people have burning questions about the data.
Maybe we can pause here and start with questions on the data, just because it was a lot.
Yeah.
And then we can, if board members can limit their questions, not at this point ask about our protocols, given that the superintendent's going to get to that. And testing and mask availability. Okay, do board members have questions, and students, of course, have questions about the data?
I have a question, Chair.
Yes, Ms.
Just
Bond.
clarification. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you so much, Superintendent. This is a lot of data to go, and just want to recognize the amazing work. And I know it's a lot of emotion and a lot of hardship and psychologies also going over our staff and nurses. So I have just a clarification question on the case informed. So I wonder, those are the case informed from the nurse. So other ways is playing out. I mean, we learn from the school. So how the nurse are informed. I mean, we discover when the student is already in the classroom or from home. We call the nurse. So can you just explain those data on the case informed, the nurse informed?
Yeah, it's both of those things that you described. In some cases, a student doesn't come to school and the parents inform the nurse, directly or through the school secretary or in whatever way that their child is home because they tested positive. And in some cases, students, are, part of the pool test, and we are identifying them as COVID positive as a result of that. And in, a limited number of cases, people come to school, the teacher or the principal or the bus driver see that the student is, symptomatic, and they'll send them to the office. And that's, so nurse informed is, the terminology that we use, but it doesn't mean that somebody informed the nurse. More often than not, the nurse is the one that's, the bulk of those cases are related to our pool testing and things along those lines. So, and in that case, they're the ones that are discovering it.
Okay, thank you. And for the hometown, the analysis, the one we just described for the elementary school and middle school. So I didn't see any high school, so we didn't start any pool testing on the high school yet?
We started the athletic pool testing this week or last week. Last week? Yeah. We started it last week. So that's all that we have going right now is, with our athletic teams.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Assistant Superintendent Townsend, can you speak to how the pool testing has gone with our student athletes at the high school level?
Yeah, we had the first round last week. It was the first effort at the high school. So given that went well, they were anxious about doing that. So, had begun, I think there was one positive pool out of them. And so excited to continue to grow that, within the athletes in terms of making it available to more athletes over time who want to opt in. And we have posted and are hoping to staff for the additional kind of health assistance for the high school to be able to consider growing it at the high school at this time. Thus far, as we know, it's been challenging to staff these kinds of roles. We only have one applicant currently. So continuing to try and work towards having some additional capacity at the high school to expand pool testing beyond, co-curriculars.
Thank you. I just want to say that my daughter is participating as a student athlete during high school, and the communications has been excellent. Both she gets the notifications, the reminders about when to go get tested, and I get them, and it's been very clear and And there have been many of them, which is great because it's hard to remember in a busy day. So just acknowledging and appreciating that the communications that's going into getting the student athletes in and getting tested. Okay, are there other questions? Ms. Dio?
On slide 14, it shows that the biggest, the Peaks Island School, had the biggest jump. Is that specifically because of COVID cases or is it something else?
I mean, Peaks is very small. So when you are very small, you're going to see more jumps in the data because, 4 kids makes a huge difference in a school with 30 kids. So I think that that's what you see there. So we don't know that the numbers of students who are absent in any of the schools are, they're not exclusively COVID cases. This is general attendance. So this includes, students who have COVID, students who are, quarantining. When you go back to the previous month when, students were still close contacts and needed to quarantine, those were in that group, as well as students who aren't coming to school for any number of reasons. So it's not just COVID. But I think, we toyed with not putting Peaks in there because your eyes just naturally go to those big ups and downs. But that's the primary reason. And, it's 35 kids altogether, so very small, and 4 kids can, sway you significantly.
Board Member Burke.
Thank you. These charts in their own way remind me of a lot of images that I saw yesterday from the storm of the giant wave breaks on our coast and water coming up the piers and onto our waterfront streets here in Portland. It's concerning to see this. Shout out to Gavin, I presume, for this awesome data presentation. So thank you for that. I'm wondering, are we continuing to track and if we hear any updates about attendance by race? And I know our free and reduced lunch data is eroding in quality, but do we have that as well?
Yeah, the dashboard has all of that. I know we looked at it last week. I was going to say the general trend is not significantly different from what it normally has been. I think with the exception of African American student attendance has gotten worse over the past month. So that's the only place where we have seen an increase. I think otherwise, our Latinx attendance is still, has the highest absence rates and so on. But, normally our African-American student attendance is, consistent with our white student attendance, not a huge disparity, and it has jumped significantly over the past month.
Okay, thanks. And then I'm just looking at that homeroom slide. I'm just looking for perhaps a little plainer language. I know you're trying to explain all the nuances to us, but I understand within Ocean Ave, you were able to essentially do the tracing to not being in school, so you didn't have to do that shutdown. But in the other buildings, could you not? Is it just not conclusive, or was the conclusion that spread was happening in those rooms, and that's why we had to close them?
Talk about that?
I wouldn't say, as with anything with the level of community transmission, we're not able to conclusively say one way or the other. So the language we've been using is if we didn't have a way to identify the individual cases, and we were seeing this increase or a maintenance, right? If it was like 3 one week and 3 the following week, that it was concerning, and out of an abundance of caution of the continued elevated number of cases that, we thought a classroom would benefit from being out for a cycle to ideally allow that to kind of move through there, whether it was happening in the community or not, but just out of being concerned around it. So we haven't made any definitive conclusions.
Okay, thanks. Did staff pool testing begin or?
So it will begin so we've had pool testing available to anybody who wanted to participate in it at the school level. So that has been, and we have, good staff participation in that pool testing, but it's entirely voluntary. Starting this week, and I'll talk about that briefly, coming up next, we will require anybody who is not vaccinated to participate in pool testing or otherwise show proof of a negative test on a weekly basis.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands from the board. I have a question back on the elementary, middle school homeroom analysis. Just to help me make sure I fully understand this. How does this chart account for the many classrooms, I believe, where you have multiple pools in one classroom?
Those are included in there, so we're getting
I don't have audio on.
Let's see. We still have. Can anybody who's on Zoom? What?
Your computer needs to be muted.
Sorry about that. Will the person who has unmuted their computer please?
The perennial mute issues.
And I'm not even on camera or anything.
I wasn't calling you out. For all of us.
So this analysis is different than the pool test analysis that was on the prior slide. This is the number of elementary homerooms does not equate to the number of pools.
Right.
There may be multiple pools for a given homeroom because we've been, the initial guidance from the state allowed us to have pools of like 8 to 10, and we've stuck with that because it helps us to minimize we can do more targeted follow-up on the testing.
I see. So this is just looking at the number. So the first line in the chart, the number is just kids who are in a pool that was positive.
No, that's the number of homeroom classes district-wide in elementary schools in Portland Public Schools. There are 187 from pre-K through 5th grade, like homeroom classes.
Okay.
I was just going to say, but don't homerooms meet like once a month usually?
No, in the elementary, that's the primary scheduling mechanism. It reflects, as, the vast majority of our elementaries are, self-contained elementary classrooms. And so that reflects kind of that cohort of students. So that's where we're continuing to work on analyses for middle school and high school, looking at attendance rates in different ways, because at middle school and high school, homerooms are often, kind of a proxy for their advisories. But then those student groupings may move to many different places throughout the course of the day. So it's not as reliable, at the secondary level. So we've been able to really get precise at the elementary level. It's like this teacher, this classroom has,
So just to clarify again, the number is the total number of classrooms.
Correct.
District-wide.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That makes this chart a lot more understandable for me. And I'll just say, this analysis is very helpful and is also very reassuring. So I appreciated the initial charts that showed the trend versus the county trend, and then this much more honed in analysis that tells a similar story, but looking at all of the detail of the data. So thank you so much for this. And I think it's a testament to all of the work that's being done with our layered precautions. Are there any, Miss Billiou?
I guess this is more of an observation, but I'm wondering if you guys have or have any plans to utilize the USPS's new programming to send people home, like COVID home care kits. I'm wondering if you guys have any plans on using that and maybe pushing that to parents that could need that resource.
That's a good suggestion. We will put that in our community newsletter. We have promoted it heavily with our staff.
Okay.
So our staff is very much aware of, both that program and our insurance company's own program to make, tests accessible to members. So we've done that, but it's a good suggestion to also promote that in the community. We also are pursuing, purchasing large amounts of
Okay.
of additional tests. So, our nurses are currently vetting all of the different options that have been made available to us. And we hope to be able to, to procure that to the extent that they're available.
Okay, yes, Mr. Youssef, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The illness personnel that is high on the staff, is that include the quarantine time and COVID cases?
Yeah, the COVID cases, there's a separate bar dedicated to the COVID cases there. It's the second highest bar. Many of the ones that are in the illness could also be COVID, but it just takes a while for HR to catch up and move those into the COVID leave. So there's probably a lag with numbers coming off of that, off of the tall bar into the second bar that you will see over time. But the COVID bar and, whatever gets moved over includes quarantines as well. There used to be a column, a separate column that is quarantine, and we just decided to collapse them because you had too many bars and couldn't really read what was in there. But we do have within that is quarantine cases as well.
And this is since January 1st?
Yes, this is since January 1st.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I think we can go ahead with the presentation.
I have a quick.
Ms. Bondo, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Please
sorry.
go ahead, Ms. Bondo.
Yeah, just another quick question came out here. We were able, I don't know, maybe not, just something come out to my mind, to separate those different cases. We know we have some vaccinated and no vaccinated. I know about the elementary school. So do we have any data if those cases we just had last week, if we were able to know how many of those cases were vaccinated and not vaccinated among staff as well?
We've not been tracking that. We don't have a central repository of students who are vaccinated. We're able to do that particularly before when we were doing contact tracing on those cases to be able to go and look at the, I guess it's the CDC website or the Health and Human Services websites, and nurses have access to that, and they're able to determine if, this individual was vaccinated, and then that changed what needed to happen by way of quarantine and all of that, but we don't have all of that downloaded in a way that we can sort of connect it to our other data sets.
Okay. So can we have now, I think after a while, our staff vaccination rate, did we increase, or we still have a non-vaccinated? I know we're going with the weekly testing. So as the rate now by the school, everything is going with the vaccination.
I'm looking to Mrs. Stoddard. I don't think that we've actually done a recent one, but we're at 94%. We are, in the process. We've been, for the past, couple of weeks communicating with staff who, in our records show up as either not vaccinated or we don't know. And, that's 6% of our staff, and, requiring them to get tested. So, so we're still operating from that same number, Ms. Bondo, of 6% of our overall staff that are either not vaccinated or they've not come forward to tell us, and so we're counting them as not vaccinated.
Okay, I see.
that's a monthly reporting cycle, and the deadline for the month of January is coming up later this week. So by the next board meeting, we'll have a sense of how much that's moved, given, all that's been experienced with this surge, as well as the implementation of the mandatory weekly testing. So by the next board meeting, we'll have kind of the first month of 2022 to see if there's been a change from, how we ended 2021.
Perfectly. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. All right, let's move ahead.
Okay. So as we said, we're going to talk about the changes in our protocols, as well as a little bit more on testing and masks. So over the past few weeks, there have been significant changes to the CDC and Maine Department of Education standard operating procedures. At our last meeting, we reported on key changes about the quarantine period and the testing requirements. And we also introduced at that time some changes to contact tracing that we had determined were within the guidelines and helped to lighten the load of our school nurses. This past week, the CDC further relaxed contact tracing requirements, essentially tabling the need to do it in schools for the time being altogether. We'd already moved to make some changes which significantly reduced the need to do detailed contact tracing, particularly in the elementary and the middle schools, while retaining the notification of families at the classroom and house level at the elementary and middle school, respectively. We're working with our nurses to determine if these practices should continue or be further curtailed. And we will also need to determine what is appropriate to do at the high school level, where up until now, we have retained our contact tracing requirements pretty much unchanged. Once we have those conversations with our medical team, we'll discuss it with our safe and healthy, our health and safety partners in the collective bargaining units before implementing any changes. We also reported at the last meeting that the Maine OSHA had issued rules requiring public entities to implement a vaccine mandate or weekly testing for non-vaccinated staff. As everybody knows, those rules were suspended as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. But notwithstanding that, we are proceeding with weekly testing of non-vaccinated staff. Starting this week, nurses in each location will administer a supervised antigen test to eligible staff and report test results to the person's supervisor. Any unvaccinated staff that is unable to attend the nurse's office hours will need to schedule testing at a location of their choice. And in those cases, any charges for the testing will be the responsibility of the employee. As we've said before, vaccinations are the highest return mitigation strategy that we have, and we continue to encourage and incentivize all of our employees to get vaccinated and to get boosted. As I mentioned in response to Ms. Bilyeu's question, we continue to look for a way to procure additional testing, including looking to purchase at-home tests beyond the antigen testing that is currently supplied to us by the state. Because of the high number of positive pools, as we reported earlier, we've administered around 2,000 Binax tests each of the past 2 weeks. So it is interesting that, we talked a lot about trying to reduce the contact tracing for our nurses so that they would be able to do more case management. And unfortunately, most of that time has been eaten up in doing follow-up Binax testing for our pools. At the last meeting, we discussed access to high-grade masks for all staff. We have revised and communicated our procedures for staff to get access to N95 masks, and we've seen a trickle of staff pursuing this avenue. We also deployed KN95s after the last meeting to every school. We still have a sufficient supply of these masks to support our staff for a good period of time and have a clear procurement avenue to replenish our stock as needed. So that's it. Almost 2 years into the pandemic, we continue to face some twists and turns that result in significant challenges. We've overcome these by working together, deferring to our medical experts, committing to keeping each other safe, by following the science, and by recognizing that our top priority is keeping our schools safe for in-person instruction whenever possible. So I'm confident that if we continue to do that, we will continue to overcome those challenges that we're now confronting in this new stage of the pandemic. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Just excellent, excellent work. I'm looking to the board for questions. Ms. Bondo?
I have
Go ahead, Ms. Bondo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. We can hear you, Ms. Bondo.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So my question is almost from the last part. Then the superintendent just mentioned about the non-vaccinated staff. If they cannot contact the nurse office, they have to provide their own COVID test. So I'm just wondering about the length of the results coming back to us. Are we, if they cannot get the nurse and get the COVID test from our nurse, and then they have to make sure that they have to provide those testing from outside. So they have to come to work until they get the results. So how the scenario will play out?
Yeah, that's correct. And, again, it's a weekly, the requirement is that they do it every week. So, we will, on a weekly basis, expect to receive that from anybody who who can't make the nurse's office hours for the testing. So that's the expectation. And yes, people, in theory could potentially test positive and still be amongst us. But that's true for anybody coming, and, if the nurse's day for testing is on Wednesday, Monday and Tuesday, they would have potentially been, COVID positive and in school. So, yeah, that is absolutely true.
Okay. So quickly, we still have the 24 hours results return for the protesting, or is still taking a little longer?
It's pretty close. I mean, the guarantee is 48 hours, and they've done a remarkably good job of getting within 24 hours. I think over the last couple of weeks, as more and more schools have participated and tests have come back positive, we've had some laggards that are taking the full 48 hours. A handful that have gone beyond those 48 hours, but not too many. So, we're generally still holding to, 24 hours from the time of receiving them in the lab.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Superintendent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there other questions from the board? Ms. Russell-Better? Go ahead, Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent, I just wanted to thank you for the swift action on just recommunicating about the masks with staff, because I know that had been done, but just appreciate your responding to just the times that we're in and just making sure that staff have access to the high quality masks. I just wanted to clarify, it sounds like you mentioned that KN95 masks had been distributed to schools, and I got the sense that you were saying you feel confident that we can reorder those, that there's not an issue at this time of replenishing those as needed.
Yeah, we have, I checked before the meeting today, we have 24,000. We're getting an additional 30-some thousand within 2 weeks. So we're back up over 50,000.
Great.
Those masks.
Thank you. I just was curious because some people have mentioned just trying to access them personally has been challenging. So I just wanted to know that that was not an issue. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Dio?
I was curious about the financial incentive for the people who are not vaccinated. Does that include just the first shot, or is it the second and the boosters?
Yeah, so it's the combination of the first and second. That was $100 to anybody back in September that showed evidence of it, and then subsequently anybody who became vaccinated afterwards. And now we also have another $100 per individual who shows us their booster.
Thank you.
Proof. Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions from the board. I just want to Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, for moving forward with the requirement that staff who haven't shown us that they're vaccinated should go through pool testing or produce a negative result weekly, following the spirit of the OSHA requirements, despite the disappointing Supreme Court ruling. It's, from my standpoint, absolutely the right thing to do. So I appreciate that leadership and thank you for it. All right. I think unless you have anything else, Mr. Superintendent, we can move on. Okay, so now we are moving to the report of the secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes from our January 4th, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Russell Better,
Okay.
seconded by Mr. Youssef. Are there any questions on the motion? Any questions about our minutes? Ms. Dio?
There is only X's for the date, the time stamp for the start of it.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
For the meeting coming to order, it was just X's. Does that matter?
We'll get that. Sorry about that.
We'll update that. Thank you, Ms. Dio. All right, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move to public comment. So this is public comment on, specifically on the minutes from our last meeting on January 4th. Is there any public comment? If so, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom or come forward to the podium. Okay, I don't see any public comment on our minutes, so I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our minutes? Board Member Burke?
Just for the good of the order, generally correct, but my last name has no E. My grandfather dropped Berkovich to Burke due to rising anti-Semitism in the earlier 20th century, and I continue to have to tend to that with the Burke no E, because he didn't know about the Irish Burkes.
Board Member Burke, that is very helpful context, as I want to add an E to it personally as well. So we will make that correction, and thank you for pointing it out, and apologies for the mistake. Okay, seeing no other discussion, let's move to a vote. By roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving the minutes from our last meeting on January 4th, 2022. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Aswami,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Dio,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the minutes pass unanimously with the students voting with the majority. And now we're on to consent items. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this agenda item?
Yes, we have a hefty list for this week. Under policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item, and our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank, in this case, the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance, including from Portland High School, for Portland High School, Hannaford gift cards for the food pantry from April and Dennis Noonan of Portland, a monetary donation to be used for the purchase of clothing and other needed items for students from Andrew Flint and Hallie Gilman, also of Portland. Paths received the following donations: to Detroit Diesel Engines for the Marine Systems Program from Water Ventures LLC of Portland, a 2005 Nissan Sentra for the automotive program from Maxime Yorgansioglu, sorry about that for butchering your name, of Scarborough, a 2008 Ford Explorer for the automotive program from Maureen Clancy of Cape Elizabeth. Also a 2005 Saturn Vue for the automotive program from Brian Hall of Portland, and a monetary donation to create scholarships and tool belt awards and operations for students completing the construction cluster program and entering the construction field from Judith and Thomas Watson of Portland. Lyseth Elementary School received the following donations: winter jackets, snow pants, hats, mittens, socks, underwear, and sweatshirts to distribute to students in need of winter clothing from Dominic Lander of Portland, and 25 pairs of winter boots to distribute to students in need from Adam Siegel of the Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine here in Portland. Reich Elementary School received 50 pairs of winter boots to distribute to students in need from Adam Siegel of the Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine, and 120 pairs of mittens and gloves for students in need from Tamara Hillier of Maine Medical Partners Nephrology of Portland. Gerald Talbot Elementary School received the following donations: used clothing for the clothing closet from Ferrasi Cherry of Deering High School, 53 winter coats for students from the Knights of Columbus Council, 11257, and St. Vincent de Paul Soup Kitchen of Portland. A monetary donation to the families of students from Gail Cressy, and coats, snow pants, and boots for students in need from Bill Kowalczyk and Jody Halliday of Portland. And finally, Longfellow Elementary School received classroom supplies for teachers such as pencils, crayons, tissues, etc., sneakers for students, and classroom snacks from Vaughn DeBias of Northeast Auto Works in Westbrook. And we're very grateful to all of these generous contributors for their generous support and contributions to the work of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and thank you to everyone who made such a generous contribution to the Portland Public Schools. Now we are moving on to our board focus on educational issues. And tonight we have two different board focuses. The first is an update on our Latinx listening sessions. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to introduce this?
Yep. And do you want to, Aaron, can you do the slides for me on that, please? It's hard with just one screen. I can't really do it, so I appreciate it. Tonight, we have two board focus items, and the first one, as you heard, is an update on the work that we've been doing to better understand the root causes behind the data about the challenges that our Latinx students face. We have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to walk you through, and I do want to acknowledge our staff that have been helping to organize, convene, facilitate, summarize, and process these conversations, including Executive Director for Communications and Community Partnerships, Grace Valenzuela, Family Engagement Specialist, Betsy Paz Jimesi, who you heard earlier from, and also Blanca Santiago, our retired social worker who has been actively involved in this work throughout. And finally, also, not finally, but Carlos Gomez, our Director of World Languages and English Learner Programming, along with social workers Bob Carroll and Melissa McStay at Deering High School, and Paula Hernandez at Portland High School. And I'm sure I'm leaving incredibly important contributors out. So with that, I'd like to walk you through our work with the Latinx community. First of all, why are we doing this? And just as a reminder, when we've looked at our data around our Latinx students, we find, consistently that this is a population that we are not effectively serving, and one that we have been striving to understand better what it is that we can do to actually better serve them. So the other why for this is, consistent with our priority 1 and 2, which I've shared with you before, we've committed to centering and elevating the voices of the stakeholders who are traditionally not at the table. So that's, in fact, those families and students from the Latinx community wanting to hear directly from them as to what their experiences are in our schools. So a little bit about what we've done to date, and we consider this work in progress. So we had a 2-hour parent session with about 60 participants. We did that right before the winter break. And then last week we had 2 1 hour gender-specific student sessions at DHS, 10 for students who identify as boys, 6 who identify as females. And all of the sessions have been done entirely in Spanish. And they've been facilitated, as I mentioned earlier, by Betsy and by Blanca, who in many cases have personal relationships with both the families and with the students that have been in these sessions. So a little bit about, and the way I'm going to report this is, because we had substantially more time to do some processing around the parent sessions. We have, more on that, and the student sessions are still a work in progress. As I mentioned, we've done those 2 groups at Deering High School, and we have 2 additional groups at Portland High School scheduled for next week. So, when we talk to parents, the root causes that they identified for some of the challenges in the data are things like the financial imperatives in their lives, the just sort of adolescence, the challenges of raising adolescents, and I know that that's always been a challenge, but it's very much a challenge for our families today as well. And then, institutional practices and systems that are also operating in, sort of working to make this challenging. So I'm not going to walk through all of these, but you have the PowerPoint in Board Docs, so you can see that these are, pretty close to in the words of the family. So we tried to keep the essence of what they've said. And so, these are the financial imperatives, the challenges that families face, both, to be able to, to be able to meet all of their financial needs, and also to be able to extend out in ways that are appropriate for, for adolescent students. And so I think that those are, some of the challenges that you see there. Some of them are different from what you might find in mainstream, non-Latinx communities. So I think it's important to sort of get into some of those details to be able to understand them. Around the next one, which is adolescence, again, these you'll see more, voices that are similar to what you might hear from other parents in terms of, the challenges of the growing independence of students, the, wanting to have the same things as their peers, issues of embarrassment and shame and things along those lines that are also, operant in, for adolescents broadly, and certainly present here as well. And then the last one is around the systems. So the institutional practices and systems. And I think that this is a place where, there are significant things for us to pay attention to, some of which were, frankly surprising and inconsistent with what we think our practice is, but definitely things that we want to tackle, because these are the things that are most directly within our control. So things like the rigidity of our school schedule, particularly for students who need to work and, as a result, are challenged to be able to attend school at the times that we hold school. So I think a lot of issues around that, concerns about the quality and intensity of our English programs. So I think that that also resonate, that you will also see in the student report shortly. And I think things along the lines about the communication from the school, particularly around only in English, and around negative things. I think that was something that came up in some of the comments from families. So in terms of, when we asked what would you need, we sort of break them out into two different things. One is in-school needs and the other one is community-based needs. And so just briefly on those two, these are some of the specific suggestions that we heard from families around things that we can do in school. So, a stronger orientation program, dedicated Spanish-speaking, staff at the schools that are able to provide direct support for families, as they come in. And obviously we have, Betsy, who's incredible, and Isabella, who is our new other Spanish-speaking family engagement specialist. But, there's two of them and we have lots of schools and lots of needs. And so, having more dedicated Spanish-speaking staff is something that came up. Around the rigidity of the schedule to provide more flexible opportunities for students to be able to access school, to be able to connect what they're doing outside of school. So work and things that are more tied to their career and technical interests and, being able to get academic credit for that. The stronger English language development programming that I mentioned earlier, and then things like more emotional support for all of our students, and more support around pathways to college, particularly understanding the limits that many of our students who have irregular, if you will, immigration status, and what that means in terms of their ability to access that. And then we heard a lot of positives about some of the opportunities that we've created for students, including our affinity group work that we did last summer, and families wanting to see that continue throughout the school year. So those are some of the in-school takeaways. And then, some of the community-based ones, which we have a commitment to being a part of a community solution to this, but, some of them are, substantially outside of the, our ability to act on individually. So, issues of financial stability, issues of, community development and things along those lines. Again, we believe that we should be partners at the table to address those, but don't know that we can necessarily do those by ourselves. And then, I think it was also very clear that this community felt that they have a strong responsibility to also to do everything within their power to also ensure that their students are progressing in school. So, the degree to which, the community supports its own was also a very strong theme that came out of those conversations. And so the key takeaways from our conversations with students fall into these three categories. And again, these are, two sessions that we had last week. So we haven't really even met as a group to really be able to process. So this is more than anything, my sort of summarizing based on, having sat through them and looked at the notes. So they fall into, academic pathways, school culture issues, and school to home or home to school connections. And so under academic pathways, again, trying to capture to the extent possible the students' voices in this is, clearly that, our students have high aspirations for themselves. They have goals. They see school as an important resource in overcoming their challenges, and believing that that is shared with their families. And then also, very, very much a part of the conversations with both of the groups was more English instruction that's direct and practical, that helps them to access coursework that they currently aren't able to access because of the limitations in their English. And just it was interesting to hear from the students, many of whom had, learned in another country, or in some cases had learned in other districts outside of Portland, that they in general, and particularly in the group that identified as female, found that they thought that our general expectations were lighter than what they might have expected otherwise. And then I think it was good to hear that they had, in general, strong, positive relationships. Part of what we, one of our goals is that all of the students have a meaningful connection with a caring adult. And I think in general that was one of the questions that we asked and that all the students did. And it was interesting to see where those connections were, were very much lived in a certain part of the school. So it was tied into the EL staff that worked with the students and the social workers. So, and of course, Betsy. And then around school culture, that most of our kids, consistent with that last point, they felt safe and supported. They had friends beyond their language group, but mostly within their English support classes. And that it was interesting to see that few of them are engaged in, deeply engaged in school activities, and they would like to see more support around how they can access some of those activities within school. And, they recognize some of the challenges that we see in the data around attendance and, identified work requirements and just early start times as being tied into the attendance struggles. And then last is the homeschool connection. So again, some of the things that, these are part, and I'll talk a little bit about what are the next steps, but, some of the things that you heard from the parent, from the family sessions as well, the, financial pressure to work in order to be able to meet their own expenditures, not necessarily there wasn't a significant amount of students saying that it was to help at home. We did have students who are unaccompanied minors who obviously, are working for themselves. And, then we also heard, which we had also heard in the parent session, about concerns about communication from school that is primarily focused on, negative things, particularly tardy calls, and, sometimes for what is they consider to be a very, limited tardiness. And also the fact that many of those are in English, in English only. So just some of the next steps for us. I mentioned that we're having sessions at Portland High School. And we also, some of the work that we have ahead is to, more closely try to develop those themes between what we heard from students and what we heard from families. We are committed to sharing this broadly, obviously, with you. We've shared with school leaders, with community leaders as well, and then for us to develop priorities and timelines for addressing the needs that come from this work. So this is obviously still work in progress, but we wanted to give you an update since, we talked a lot about the importance of us doing this work, and we thought it would be important. I also, want to be clear that as we, look at some of those needs and, develop priorities, that those likely have budget implications. And so part of, our commitment always is to have, transparency into those things that you're going to see in the budget, as part of these board meetings leading up to the budget. And as we, are moving into budget season, we think it's important to do this, and that will sort of lead us into the next board focus for today. So, but I'll pause and let you ask any questions that you might have or comments, and then we'll move into the second one.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Ms. Biliu.
I'm wondering if you can kind of break down the process of how, basically of how they take information from these students. And I guess some background on my question is a lot of times when surveying or asking people questions, they might not be as aware of the question that they're being asked. So I'm wondering if there's also even education or resources that are presented to them so that they can better understand what they're being asked and and answer accurately, or give more accurate answers on like what their experiences are.
Yeah, I mean, we've had skilled facilitation from Blanca Santiago, who is a trained bilingual social worker with deep connections in in Portland's Latinx community. So I think that has been our primary resource in doing that work. I don't know if Blanca is with us tonight, but also, Carlos, I see Blanca is with us. So Blanca, I don't know if you want to say anything in there. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Betsy Pastimesi is, very close to many of the families that we've been able to bring together. I think we were incredibly impressed by the turnout and by the willingness of the community to actually share their thoughts. So I don't know, Betsy, Blanca, if you guys want to say anything about the actual process. I certainly felt it was extremely well carried out by this group. So, but I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that.
And maybe I can offer more context. When I was in school, it was, or when we would have information sessions like this, it was hard for people to be present because half of the things that were being, or not half, but like when folks were being asked about like racism, they don't know the definition of racism, right, in concrete, or they wouldn't know the definition of white supremacy. So it's hard for them to then actually accurately express their experience when being faced with that type of system or that type of thing. So that's essentially what I'm asking is, how are these students being given the context to which these questions or these analysis are like being asked?
Yeah, so we did not distribute specific materials around any of those, specific things. But again, I particularly, I think with the adults, I think that the student sessions were not as well attended as we hoped. And I think that there are things that we can tweak as we move out to Portland High for the next round. But, definitely in the parent session that we had, very on-point engagement and very forthcoming responses from members of the community. I don't know, Blanca and Betsy, I keep asking you and then I keep talking over you.
Well, and also you were taking, further follow-up questions from the young woman who was speaking earlier. So the way that this worked was that we had a particular set of things that we wanted to learn about. Truancy, absenteeism, all these kinds of things. We thought maybe there were barriers, so we wanted to have a very open discussion. So this was more of a focus group as opposed to an informational session of any kind. It wasn't, we weren't looking for the right answers. We were looking for engagement, openness, for us to be able to have a conversation with these parents and these students that would be very honest and open, built on the relationships that had already been formed, and in great part for the work that Betsy has done with those parents and students. So there's a great deal of trust in the room already. And so the kinds of answers that we got sort of like fell into categories, and that's what we were looking for different sets of data, so that then we could look at those and see what the common themes were, and look to ourselves mostly for how we were going to do these solutions, not necessarily asking them to solve any problem for us, although many of them came up with really good ideas and had great feedback for us. We weren't really looking for the right answers. We were looking for like an openness to engage with us based on the trust that had already been formed. I hope that answers some of the question, and maybe, Betsy wants to add something to that. She really did take the lead in this, and I was a co-facilitator to make sure that we didn't miss any pieces and that things were getting recorded that needed to be said that might, and then to kind of pay attention to other people in the room who might be less likely to like raise their hands and want to say something, but that clearly had something to say. So it really was more about engaging the students and the parents.
Yeah, I really wouldn't add anything to that other than a lot of what we saw with the parents was, years of working with the families. And, it was a lot of things that they were reporting. And I think parents were, I can tell you, were thrilled. We're very happy that they had an opportunity to be able to express themselves in their language and directly with administration. But a lot of this work it is just work that's years of just laying that groundwork of trust so that parents would open up. So.
Yeah. I'll also say that we didn't ask, in terms of the questions, we didn't ask questions. We kind of used a model that was more like appreciative inquiry, where you actually say, tell me more about this. What about this? So that people would feel more open to sharing.
Thank you for that. And I wasn't necessarily asking about if you guys were asking them questions and like the outcome of those questions. It was more of, was information present that they might not have, or they might not, or they might need to be more engaged in the session. So essentially, is how can we create more resources for them to show up more or engage more and be as more present and be more comfortable because they understand the process and the ways in which they need to show up in that space. So that's where I was coming from, not necessarily like, we need something from them and this is how we're going to get it type of thing. I hope that gives some clarification.
Thank you. And any suggestions that you have, that would be great.
Ms. Bondo?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think this is something I'm so glad to see happening because has been overdue. And I cannot be more grateful to Betsy and Bianca to facilitate that, because this is what we've been looking for, to make sure that we value our culture, we value our families. And I think, like you just mentioned, Bianca, is about the trust. Are we building the voice for parents to be engaged to that process? And I think making that foundation for years, like you just said, Betsy, is exactly what our focus group was about. But I would just want to encourage her, it's not one focus group. We need to start building on that. I mean, this is exactly where we can start prioritizing the most needed for our families so they can really be engaged. What we want to see is them to be engaged. And while they engage, they have a voice. And then they can now advocate and understand their rights to the school system, and we can move all forward. So I am just so proud for that first steps. And I hope then we need to keep moving forward, and I can do anything then really to support you guys for the next time, even though I don't speak Spanish, but I feel like we really need all the support because we really understand the same language. It's about values. And but I have a quick question about how many Spanish social workers do we have right now? I remember, if I don't remember, from the last budget, we have to hire 2. Then we added. Do we have any more social workers, Spanish speaker in our multilingual office?
We have 3, not in a multilingual office. We have 1 that's housed at multilingual, Priscilla Bittencourt. She's the McKinney-Vento social worker. And then she's Portuguese speaking. She's not Spanish speaking. And Paula Hernandez, who you heard mentioned earlier, who's at Portland High School and works specifically with the Latinx students. And then we have Annie Schneider, who is another McKinney-Vento housed at Reiki and at East End School. She splits her time. So
okay.
Yeah.
So if we don't have no one, because you guys can just explain to me better. The Portuguese and the Spanish, they have some similarities, but it's not the same languages, right? So that means now we are talking about Latinx. And I think Portuguese, we have a lot in our communities, but about the social worker, because what you just mentioned, and I look at on the summaries, I mean, is really specific. Then we need to build around the case management. Because if we need the community needs and we need the school needs, we really need to start building on that. So I think that's why we need to make sure that I'm speaking to my colleagues on the board. When we do investment, we need to make sure that voice is on the table. And while we're investing, we know that those are the needs that we really need to prioritize. So the families, Latin families and students are lifted up so they can be more engaged because they really feel like we have valued them in our public school system. Thank you so much, Bianca.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mickey. We love you championing our causes, and it's nice when our values align.
Exactly.
I will say that Blanca, for at least the last 2 years, has been a tremendous mentor to new social workers coming through both USM and through UNE. So, the folks, as few as they are, and as hard as it is for us to fill those positions, those that we have, including Priscilla, including Paula, are people that Blanca has mentored along the way. So thank you, Blanca, for that work.
Thank you. So a quick for the superintendent, I think I look at on the takeaway for in school needs. And I think what I really want to encourage is about the trade. So I think the trade, and I take some notes here, the trade for the technical support and trade. So students, they have some tools on hands to be able to, if you know, after high school, they can be on the workplace and helping families. And I think the path then we have that's just a tool for our Latin students to be able to access those trade and those technical tools. It's just the way our guidance from different high schools are working with those students. So this is something that we need to pay attention, because most of it's the guidance office who have to direct those students to be able to attend those technical institute, path. So that's something I'll just put on my note, and I think I will have a follow-up with that to make sure the guidance office can attract our Latin students who really have the needs to move to the trade and using those technical support to be direct to the path institution where they can feel comfortable, and then they can get a job to try to help the families with all expenses and needs. So I think it's something that we can try to move forward. So I'm not going to be too long, because this is something really passionate to me, and I'm really going to follow up with this. Thank you so much for a great report. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Bondo, thank you so much for 2 incredibly good points that you've made. I really appreciate your contributions. Are there other, Ms. Dew, please go ahead.
Quite a bit of the information was related to language barriers, and I was just wondering about the ability of the students and especially the parents to have access or even knowledge of the English language classes at Portland Adult Education. And the new Mainers Resource Center.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, I'll start over again. I'll wait.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Quite a bit of the issues were related to, some of them were related to language barriers. And I was wondering about the ability of the students, but especially the parents, do they know or have access to the English language classes at Portland Adult Education and know about the new Mainers Resource Center that is so wonderful through Portland Adult Education?
Mm-hmm. Those are good questions. I don't know, Betsy, maybe you can help me with that, the extent to which our Latinx families have access to the services of the Portland Adult Ed.
They do. I actually get quite a number of calls on that. So I'll usually help set them up, with their intake as far as to assess their level. And there's been quite, I would say like in the last week, I've probably made maybe 15 referrals over there of parents. So I do try to get that word out as far as English and, you know, any other kind of groups in the community. So they do access it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dio. Great question. Ms. Russell-Better, and then I'll go to Board Member Burke.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to echo the thanks to Blanca and Betsy for your dynamic work. And yeah, I'm just really happy to see and to learn about the relationship building that's been going on for so long that's enabled this next step to happen. So that's wonderful. I just had a couple of questions, I think, for the superintendent, but perhaps Blanca and Betsy might have feedback too. I just wondered, I just had a thought about ongoing communication with the stakeholder group or with the, you know, family and student groups as we are as a district, you know, trying to come up with next steps. I just wondered, because I'm just thinking of students in the past sharing, you know, that they were part of something like this and shared and kind of had that vulnerability and felt like they were engaged and then maybe didn't necessarily know kind of how that impacted on the ground changes. So I just kind of had that thought of wondering if there was thoughts about kind of how to continue to engage or give feedback about how this information would be used.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And obviously, you know, and I acknowledge that it wasn't in our, in the presentation that, you know, among the going back to people or, you know, sharing with other people is going back for validation from the folks that have made these contributions. So I think that, you know, that is something that we absolutely need to do. And, you know, again, this, I just want to keep reminding you that this is tied to specifically in our goals around, you know, ensuring that we have people at the table that traditionally are not at the table. And so, you know, it's something that we, you know, they haven't traditionally been at the table. So we don't have a ton of, you know, experience and protocols that have already been adapted. You know, we are learning, we recognize, and I think this has been a, you know, a big part of our partnership with Portland Empowered is really understanding how do we, you know, genuinely engage with communities and, you know, and trust that they are the, you know, the most knowledgeable about their experience. And they're the ones that have they're able to tell us what they need as opposed to us telling them what we think they need. So, so I think that's part of the commitment and part of what we're trying to do. And again, we're learning as we go.
Thank you. That's great to hear. So yeah, I think it was just what you're saying, that my thought around what would continual engagement look like. And I know engagement's been happening in different ways, but since this is sort of a newer step towards change, just, yeah, putting in the plug for how do we keep families engaged in the ongoing work and when it gets implemented, getting feedback and kind of following that up. And then one other question I had, Superintendent, was about next steps, which I know you said it was newer, you know, and bringing it to us today. There hasn't been, you know, you were sharing not a lot of time for staff to, you know, kind of do the next step work. But I just was curious when you mentioned about budget time and really, you know, us having to put some teeth behind, right, wanting to make some of these changes. So are you seeing the timeline of takeaways, excuse me, from these sessions to be ready for this budget season to be making proposals?
The one, you know, the one area that I think has, you know, and you heard Board Member Bondo refer to it is, you know, how do we make paths more accessible to our students? So I think that that's an area where, you know, providing language supports and things along those lines that we currently don't have in place has emerged as something. This is, you know, I mean, I will say I've known Ms. Bondo for, you know, probably 5 years of my time here. And this is something that, you know, before she was, you know, a board member that she advocated for. So I think that this is something that we've known. And I know Betsy is, you know, has been very vocal about the need to be able to do that. So I think that's something that we're committed to seeing happen this year. I think the other, you know, some of the work that we're already doing around improving our English language services for students. I think that will continue to be a priority, and this is sort of buttressed by some of what you heard from this group. And then I think the sort of a concerted effort to have more Spanish-speaking staff to provide access to this community, which is it's a growing community within our district.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Board Member Burke?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the good work over years that, we're hearing about a culmination here. I wanted to test some assumptions up front. First, on the front of this packet, the chronic absentee data presented, is that for K through 12 or just high school?
I don't recall.
The entire district. Thank you.
District, yeah.
And again, just to test my assumptions, the parents that we spoke with were parents of students of what ages?
They ran the gamut, but they tended to we also had parents of high school age students.
Okay. And then the students that you did hear from in these sessions were those that have been chronically absent or just identified?
I don't know
as
that, Betsy.
Latinx? No. Okay.
No, we mixed up the group. So it was some students who had some chronic absences. It was a mix. I didn't want to just basically create a group with just absent students and make them feel like, oh, I'm just getting pulled because of this issue. So we kept it pretty mixed so we could get different opinions.
Okay. I trust your judgment on that. And most importantly, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't not hearing from students that stood at the center of this issue. So thank you for clarifying that. Like I was talking about with COVID and the analogy of the ocean crashing against our coastline and washing up on our streets, I see that schools continue to be a place where larger societal issues wash in and often left to us by society as at large to fix. And some things you're describing are definitely things that are in our lane, and some of them are not. I just want to raise up the superintendent's previous effort to use COVID relief funding to initiate a guaranteed basic income program for Latinx families, and the state rejected that. But as we hear, that's clearly a need. I'd put a call out to our colleagues in the city that perhaps they could step up, like peers in Stockton, California, or St. Paul, Minnesota, to initiate such programs, or a nonprofit could do it, like the Magnolia Mothers Trust in Jackson, Mississippi, who have been doing guaranteed basic income programs and seeing transformative results. Because again, poverty is a lack of cash. It's not a lack of other things. I'm looking forward to your recommendations on intervening strategies based on what you continue to learn. And I'm just trying to clarify from what I heard, for any differences that are going to be made now. Did you say that there was going to be an effort to increase language supported paths, like now, not in the future? Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else that was like a now change that you were?
I think continuing our investments in our ELL programming, strengthening that. I think we made significant investments at the elementary level last year. And I think, hearing what we've heard from our high school students, I think that begs us thinking through what does that look like to create the same level of, access that we're creating at the elementary level for students at the secondary level. So I think that's the other one. And then, continuing to figure out how to increase the number of Spanish-speaking staff. That I think those are the three that jump out for me right now.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps it's me just continuing to riff a little bit, but hearing the feedback about the negative communications reminded me of the metrics that we use in our district and writ large in education, and how it's usually a deficiency-based system. And I mentioned like what's thriving data look like. So I'm going to say that again, if only for myself to hear it and keep my own investigation of what that might look like. And likewise, it leaves me in this place of like, how might we continue in a direction here at PPS that it is a place for all our students and one of true celebration, not just token celebration of, we can tout how many languages are spoken by students, but only one is dominantly spoken by teachers, that sort of thing. And I'll just raise up that I'm more and more convinced that Portland needs to investigate dual language programs as a way moving forward. I think what I'm hearing about as what we can do with the resources we have and the existing programs we have, it makes sense to me. But I think, a Spanish dual language program, a French dual language program, something like this could really be what we need to look forward to in the future as a place that really does this well and she sees a real change in outcomes.
And Carlos Gomez, who's on the Zoom, has been leading a staff work group around that issue. So I don't know, Carlos, if you want to talk about it at all, if this is the right time. I know that we're scheduled to catch up on that at some point. So.
Yeah, I would just say that this afternoon we had our second of 4 language vertical team meetings, and during our first meeting back in November, we talked about heritage language and native language instruction, and today we talked about dual languages, dual language programming, both one-way, two-way, and various research and experiences that we've had as a district with dual language, and all of this will culminate into a vision statement around our language instruction, both English language, world language, and every other type of language. So that's something that we'll see the fruits of that work over the next couple of months, and overall. Excited about getting clearer and more closely aligned to our Portland promise and our district priorities around those. So looking forward to that. And I would just take this opportunity to just say that as a note taker, a scribe for one of the 2 meetings that were facilitated by Betsy and by Blanca, that it is clear the level of trust and the relationship that both of them have with our students, families, community members, and it is a tremendous honor to work by their side. And I'm excited about where this conversation brings us and how it all can be woven into language instruction. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. I always get excited and encouraged when I hear you report what's happening. So thank you for sharing that update. And we're lucky to have you and Blanca and Betsy. Thank you all for all that you're doing. I look forward to supporting you moving forward.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Mr. Youssef, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do. So when I look at the key parent takeaways, the root causes, it just, for my understanding, I want a little bit hear from the safety concern, like safety with her guns at school, or mistakenly called to DHHS, or someone might call the police because of our absentees, our children's absentee. Are those things that we also hear more about the school and the parents?
I mean, I think, I don't recall hearing that people were concerned that we were going to call the police over their kids' absences. I don't think that was, I don't know, Betsy, I don't recall seeing that. I do think that we heard particularly from the students about the likelihood that we would call home over, over absences and things along those lines. We did hear from, parents, a theme that emerged was, just in general being, concerned about safety in schools, which is not something that is unique to the Latinx community. I think, there's a lot of things that happen and a lot of publicity around those things. So I do think that is a common concern from parents about, whether our schools are, are consistently safe. So, but I don't think that, that I heard the community be concerned or, even claim that at some point we had called the police over this. I do think that there are, that we did hear from members of the community around the, calling DHS and making, claims about, parental neglect and things along those lines, and that did rise as a concern, which is, again, not something that we only hear in the Latinx community. That is, it is a, it is a frequent concern, and one that's challenging for us because we're mandatory reporters and so on. But at the same time, in a community where there is, there's a significant amount of, concern about interactions with, with government institutions, that becomes a much more. So I do think that for us to really understand, how to triage and to think through how to do those things is part of the lessons that we need to learn. I don't know, Betsy, I know you've had experience with that as well.
Yes. So I think in regards to fear, I think sometimes it's when those, truancy letters go out. I do get that phone call. So there is that fear. And again, it goes back to any kind of contact with a government agency, right? It's scary. I mean, even for me, I'm driving, I get pulled over, I'm scared. So I think the fear as far as, DHHS, that also is when calls are made to DHHS regarding absences. So that is a fear with families as far as DHHS and police are concerned.
Yeah, I would just say that oftentimes with our families who are coming from a very different place than refugee families or other immigrant groups, where a documented status or a mixed documented status is one of the realities in those families, that fear feels very real to them, because just getting, like Betsy's example of getting pulled over, you get pulled over for a taillight being out. You don't have, all of your documents on you. You can't really, you're in trouble with the police at that point. It becomes then a more complicated issue and can even jeopardize your immigration status or your pending legal immigration status. So I think that the fear is very real for them in the way that it may not be there for other groups the individuals don't experience the same kind of fear. So I would say fear is more of the word than safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, with the safety of the guns in school, but we can say across the board, everyone's afraid of guns in schools. But a truancy letter going out means something much more significant to that family than it would to, another family could say, oh, yeah, this is just a paper tiger. Nothing's really going to come of this. And I wonder about the truancy letter and the fact that it is a bit of a paper tiger, that it's just meant to kind of like just wake people up to what's happening, but doesn't really have teeth. Or does it? I don't know. But I've never seen anybody get arrested for being truant. But maybe that does happen. I'm not sure.
It has not in my experience. And, in fact, the letter does not threaten that. It threatens that you could potentially be charged with, neglect and, fined up to $250. But I do think your larger point, Blanca, about, the concern about just being, in contact with the authorities and, just the the additional layers of complexity that creates for, somebody who has an irregular, immigration status versus for me. I think that's
Right, there's a difference, and yeah. And also the kind of like emotional upset that can happen within a family when a truancy letter is received and it has all of that content in it. And the kinds of conversations that happen after that between a mother or a dad and their child.
And I think that's what we heard in particular from the students at the student session.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo my colleagues and appreciate the work that you guys do as a team. This is an amazing, and specifically having that session in a Spanish language, it just gave them the trust and the opportunity to express their concerns. And I hope this will continue and make that bridge. As a case manager, and as a refugee, I understand that paperwork and documentations are very important and very concerning with a lot of community members that we work with. And any letter that they receive, they think that it has some sort of notice or fine or asking them to submit documentation. So thank you so much for doing the work that you guys do. And I appreciate the district and the superintendent doing the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Ms. Bilia.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to just give an opportunity maybe for you all to look at some programmings that could alleviate some of these issues. When I lived in Australia, the public school system there had multiple collaborations with different types of like companies around, like locally around the area. So they had collaborations with like a grocery store called Kohl's and a grocery store called Woolworths, and they offered opportunities for students to have kind of like a temp job opportunity. So they would have the opportunity to work there for 6 months. And then if the company liked them or liked the job they did, they would hire them as a student, with like their work visa or a student worker or something like that. I'm wondering if you guys had any opportunity to look at those type of solutions, or if that's something that you could look into.
Yeah, I think that those are some of the things that we heard from students in particular around, sort of credit for work and things along those lines. We do a significant amount of that through our extended learning opportunities now, but there's definitely room to do more, and particularly around some of the career and technical trades things that I think you heard Mickey talk about, and that we're committed to trying to to figure out how to do that for this particular group of students. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bilia. Ms. Dio.
I was just wondering if Portland Public Schools has any data on teen parents, because on one of the root causes, it said some of our children are teen parents. Do you have a lot of data?
Yeah, I don't know. That's something that we can look at to see what we have around teen parenting. It did come up as a theme, so.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions from the board, I have a few questions. One, I'm wondering if we can revisit our assumptions behind negative school communications. I'm wondering if some of the assumptions are outdated, and also if staff are held to a very high standard in understanding that, for instance, reporting a student absent from a block leads to a call home, and ensuring that that student was actually absent for the block. So that's my first question.
I think, yes, that's definitely something that we need to look at.
Excellent. And then I really look forward to seeing the priorities coming out of these focus groups. and specifically with respect to this budget cycle, it feels urgent to, I know that we still need to do the Portland High School focus group, but it seems both urgent from the perspective of the problem we're trying to solve around absenteeism, but also in just responding to so many families participating and showing that we actually, we do value them and are centering, are working to make this first attempt to center their voices and experiences. So I know the timing is tight, but I do really hope we can do as much as we can to include the priorities in the budget. I know you've already alluded to some of what we might include. For the Portland High School focus groups, focus groups, I'm wondering how we can ensure that students that have trouble with absenteeism are present for the focus groups and are adequately represented. I fully understand doing focus groups with students who also, who don't have issues with absenteeism. But it seems like we want to make sure that the students who we're most concerned about are actually present and that we're not assuming what their, we're not assuming what their needs are based on other students, other Latinx students. Okay, thanks. And then I guess my last thing is just, I think it's astounding that 60 parents and family members showed up. Like, that only can happen based on the groundwork that has been done, I know, over a long period. So 60 parents and family members don't show up unless there's real trust and meaningful outreach over a long time. So I just want to as other board members have, just acknowledge that it's awesome that we're where we are. And, I know these focus groups were essentially a first step at the district centering those voices, and I'm really encouraged and look forward to more of this work. And just want to thank Betsy and Blanca and everyone who was involved in these focus groups and this work. So anything else, Mr. Superintendent, on this?
Not on this.
Okay, so next we are moving towards our second board focus of the night, which is our district equity cohort update.
Yep. So for this, I will be turning it over to our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Barrett Wilkerson. As you know, we've been working to provide common professional development opportunities across the school district as part of our equity capacity building efforts. Increasingly, one of the key platforms for this professional development is what we call our Equity Leaders Cohort. These are professional staff at each of our buildings that work together with our central team and our long-term consulting partners at the Center for Educational Equity to develop and deliver training modules on a set of key levers that we're nurturing as a district. So today, Barrett, with members of the Equity Leaders Cohort, will be updating you on the work that the team has been doing this year and provide examples of that work in practice. As I mentioned earlier, there is a motive behind pulling these things together. This work is central to becoming a more equitable and just school system. And as we are on the day after the Martin Luther King holiday, we thought it would be particularly appropriate to do this. So, in addition to that, as we approach the FY23 budget process, we're committed to helping you to understand the critical importance of the work currently underway, largely as a result of the key investments that you've supported. None is more important than the commitment that you made when you agreed to move the funding for the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion into the general fund last year. So I think that is also part of why we wanted to have this featured today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barrett, and I know Assistant Superintendent Nally is also here to assist with that. So Barrett, I can't see you, but I understand you are there.
I sure am. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to hear a bit about this. I'm going to share my screen for a few. So hopefully you're seeing. Okay. So Javier really introduced this perfectly, so I'll go very quickly in these first few slides, which really I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're up to this year. I'll do a brief bit of framing just for board members who are new. And then I'm going to have you hear from some of our equity leaders, which I'm very excited about, the staff who are joining us just to share about the work at their school. So this is core to our safe and equitable schools and professional learning culture goals this year. But this is year 4. We launched in 18-19, which turned out to be the only quote unquote regular school year we've had actually since forming this group. Was our launch year, which is kind of hard to believe. But it's a train the trainers model where folks from throughout the district represent their school or program, and they come together and learn about different topics in equity literacy, and then are tasked with turning that around to provide training at their schools. And they're provided with activities and resources and all kinds of content to help do that. We have been supported by the Center for Education Equity, as Javier mentioned. They are the Equity Assistance Center for our region currently. And so we've been working with them since this launch. They've just been a tremendous asset to helping us really lift and scale this work. Because as a large-ish district, we really, if we relied only on outside professionals to build our professional learning related to equity literacy, we would wait years to get to the topics we want to get to, and to help build staff capacity. By doing it this way, it means that we get to grow the capacity for the long term in our district. And so I provide the ongoing support to teams and kind of help support them in their work, both around the professional development, but as well as the planning and helping make all the connections. So I just put the full list of things that the equity cohort has had presentations on prior to this year, just so you can kind of get a sense of like all of the things. So, this doesn't mean that every single one of these has resulted in a turnaround training at the school level, particularly in the last few years that have been, just a different set of challenges. But we're also investing in the team of folks who are part of this cohort and building, their understanding as key movers of our system. So this year, the focus is on a couple of different things. One you're going to hear about first is the work we're doing around understanding the N-word and a staff guidance tool we wrote and an asynchronous module. I'm going to share some of that with you. We've also done a focus around supporting LGBTQ plus students and the Portland schools community. So that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender questioning, plus students and community members. And then we are currently in the midst of a pretty big focus around restorative practices and equity. And then the final one will be focused on collaboration directly with the equity leaders around the rollout of the equity policy, which the board passed last spring. So that's the to come piece of this. So I'm going to get us right into it by sharing a bit about what we did with the N-word guidance. So we had, year over year, we had a number of incidents where staff were saying the full N-word in the context of curriculum. So it might have been reading a quote, or it might have been something that was in a material that was being used, and it was causing harm to Black students. It was incredibly disruptive and hurtful, and it seemed that there really needed to be some clarity provided that said this is not acceptable and how to handle it, and to encourage people to do pre-teaching with any curricular materials that contain that. We weren't saying, there's plenty of texts that have this word that are valuable for conversation and are important teaching tools, but we wanted to make sure that it was held thoughtfully. And so I started by doing, a lot of work to speak with staff and students to really gather their experiences and stories and understand what had been happening more deeply. And so then we drafted the guidance document. And then COVID happened and we had a lot of delays, and we decided, you know what? Let's use this time where we're all getting better accustomed to asynchronous training and things like that. And we created a training video. And so I'm going to share with you just a few, the end part of that video, just so you can kind of get a sense of it, and then turn it over to one of our equity leaders. So I have this video queued up, and hopefully this will work. But I can see some of you, so just like wave at me if it's not working.
Students have had to reach out to their principals, assistant principals, all of them, and be like, you have to speak up about this because it's affecting us and you guys are overlooking it. And as a student, I feel like our jobs are to focus on education, and we shouldn't really be focusing on that. We shouldn't have to go out of our way to take our focus off education and talk to the teachers about that. I feel like speaking up, but it's very tiring after some time, especially when you've been doing it since middle school. It's not my job. It's not my place to really educate people on things they should already know.
I'm looking at it as a conversation from now on. And I'm trying to also have kids understand that it is not something that just because you want to say it in a hallway, you may be Black, I may be Black, you say it to me. And I'm like, I don't like that word. If you have to go through all that to say that, I feel like the word should not be used. I've got to think that the people who came before me are small droplets in their classrooms about the hallway, and they're about to spark something and say something. Hope. That's the only word I can say, is that I hope that things get better, and I see things better from the person over here who graduated 8 years ago and was a Portland School, a Deering High School alum, who's telling me this is what happened in his 8 years. So change is coming.
We really focused on the intent and explaining to the students that were specifically impacted and very upset, explaining the situation by really focusing on the intent. And what we didn't do was focus on the profound impact that it had on our students. But really, as all educators, we approach our interactions with students often prepared to have the answer, to be able to fix the situation, to know more than our students do. And I think that something like this guidance and the fact that we're bringing this conversation into our room, into our schools, is really, really critical, especially at this time. And that it's okay for our teachers to be able to not always have the answer, but to partner with our students and with our colleagues to do the right thing. And I think that this move on the part of the district and this guidance document is the exact first step of many that are really important for our entire school communities.
It's definitely gotten better in my time here in the district, just again, because talking about it, because equity is at the forefront. Sometimes when you give kids a lot of student voice, then you're going to hear things that are not easy to hear. So I think part of the last few years is that overall an awesome thing that kids feel like they can talk about this stuff and confront teachers if they do something they don't think is okay. So one level I might feel like, oh, this is going terribly because it keeps coming up like a couple times a year in our school. But I think part of that is because they feel empowered to let you know and not just go, these people don't care about me. I don't care about them. I'm just going to pull my hood over my head and just walk in and out of the building. They feel like they have stake in it, so they speak out. So that's a good thing.
This guidance document exists because of the insight and input from Black staff and students throughout this district. So I would say thank you to all of them for helping us move forward on this issue. It helps all of Portland Public Schools because of your contributions. And I would say thank you to all of our staff who have been willing to talk about and go deeper around this issue, to administrators who have been willing to look at their practices as well. So that's the clip of the video for you. And then I figured I would just show you briefly the guidance document. So shout out to Grace Valenzuela, who I think is still on. But Grace and I worked on this project very closely together, the video and then the design of the staff guidance document. So it's designed to make it be hopefully quite readable for staff to kind of think about the different elements of this issue. While this is really designed more about like staff and staff preparing other staff, there is there is some pieces to think about in terms of student and how we approach students and how we approach use of that, among students, and just being thoughtful about that. And then, of course, the resources that we looked to help us create this resource. So I want to there we go. Okay. I want to give opportunity to have Meg Rooks, who is one of our equity leaders representing Lincoln Middle School and one of our library coordinators, just speak to a little bit from her perspective about the rollout of this particular aspect of training. So this is a turnaround training where staff on the Equity Leaders Cohort were provided with these materials as well as a facilitation guide, and then folks turn it around and provide that training at the school level. And so I want to introduce you to those of you who don't already know Meg, who is a real superstar for Portland. We're very lucky to have. And Meg, I'm very grateful that you are here with us to talk a little bit about the rollout of this piece at Lincoln Middle.
Happy to. Hi, everyone. Like she said, I'm Meg Rooks, librarian at Lincoln and one of the equity leaders at Lincoln. So we rolled this out, I think in October. I don't remember exactly. And it was a pretty straightforward professional development. We showed the video, which is, I think it's like 9 minutes long. It's a decent, and it has perspectives from several different students and from several different educators across the district about their experience and their thoughts on the use of the N-word. And after watching the video, faculty read through the guidance and then worked in small groups with some guiding questions about, what stood out to them, what gave them some relief reading that and knowing that the guidance was in place and what questions they still had. And overwhelmingly, our staff at Lincoln, felt like agreed with the guidance and felt really comfortable with what their role is in terms of use of the N-word in the class and understood the difference between, still being able to teach books that might include the N-word, but not reading it aloud and doing the pre-work. And that I have seen at both the schools I work at was already in place, where letters would go home and discussions would be had before books that include the N-word were taught. And then questions that faculty still might have. And that opened up a lot of questions, because I think a lot of faculty still wonder or don't feel comfortable in how to interact when they have students of color using the N-word with each other. And the guidance is purposefully vague on that. And I've reached out to Barrett a couple of times to ask clarifying questions, and Barrett's come back to me with not very clear answer, very purposefully. And so I think that has left teachers doing their own work in terms of becoming more comfortable talking about this in particular, and just racism in general with students, and making room for those uncomfortable conversations. So I think that this opened up a lot of other issues in terms of just how uncomfortable those conversations can be and how necessary they are, and how to go about approaching those conversations. Anything else you want me to add, Barrett?
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Meg. So as Meg really kind of queued up, the equity work is often, gray area. It is often like very challenging and it is imperfect. And, sometimes it's really easy to say, do exactly this or don't do exactly that. But a lot of it is more nuanced and complex. And this has really, getting deeper into this and taking the time to do so thoughtfully has really elevated that for me and for, I think, this district. And so, there's certainly going to be more to come on this. This is not, while the guidance and the training video is just one piece, and that certainly has a completion of like, we rolled this out with the schools, the equity leaders shared it, all of that, there is sort of an endpoint there, but more long-term, it really has elevated like where there is discomfort. Why is there discomfort? Let's talk about that and the need to go deeper. So that's just an example to share with you. And I want to share another. So the second topic we got into in the Equity Leaders cohort is a focus around supporting LGBTQ plus Portland Public Schools community. And this is one where, just like the last one, we actually did not utilize resources from the Center for Education Equity. We actually relied heavily on our community resources to support building staff understanding. And so in this training of trainers experience, we had Quinn Gormley, who's the executive director of Maine Transgender Network, and Gia Drew, who's the education director at Equality Maine. Both spent significant time providing foundational training for our equity leaders that then I took in and kind of compiled resources for the equity leaders to turn around training at their schools. We also, of course, linked this to the policies and practices we have in Portland Public Schools. So deepening equity leaders' understanding around the transgender and gender expansive students policy. And Kate Brogan, our ombudsperson, joined to speak specifically around the harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment policy, because those are all, very directly linked. So now you get to hear from another incredible Portland Schools employee, Ina Demers, who has taught with us for more than a few years and has just joined the equity cohort this year. And we're absolutely delighted to have her. And so she's going to just share a little bit about how this turned around at East End School.
Okay, good evening. I'm Ina Demers, and Joel Peck and I are leading the equity team at East End. This picture reminds me of all those pride parades that I have attended. And the first time I went to a pride parade, I wasn't sure what it was. So I brought my two very young grandnephews. And when I found out what it was, I said, oh my goodness, I hope their parents are not going to get mad at me for coming home with all the flags and all the decorations. But they were fine with it. So anyway, we rolled out the first module training at East End last month, December 8th. And Joel led that module. I was assigned to the second module because we decided to not just do all of it and overwhelm everybody. So we're taking module by module so that we can gradually learn about this. Because as I express all the time, I said that, this is not my expertise and that I am learning right alongside everybody. So we decided that a question on what would it look like to have all individuals feel they could safely define their gender and sexual orientation without others' biases or assumptions. So that word safely is very important because they need to feel safe and, kind of defining their own gender and sexual orientation. And biases and assumptions are good for discussion, because that would be like a learning curve. And at both the training, only Joel, Karen, and Kelly and myself were speaking. So everybody was like silent. And that's what I feel need to change, because we need to talk about this. Both modules went well, but thinking about it, I thought that we need to have like a short survey asking the staff member what they think and what they would like to learn, in the third module, or perhaps having an open discussion. So this should be a continuum with real actions in mind as a result. So this is like imperfect, like Barrett explained, imperfect and challenging, because I'm not an expert in this. So, and I'm sure that staff members also feel, I'm not sure how they feel. And that's why I need to know how they feel about this and what are their, barriers. What do they want to know? I mean, all these questions that come up when Joel and I spoke, that needs to be addressed. So I don't know where this is going to end up, but we will continue doing this to help, to support staff members, so we could also support our students. So I think that's it. Barrett, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's great. Thank you, Ina. Appreciate it.
You.
And then the last overview I want to share is a little bit about the work we're doing around restorative practices. So this is a big bucket of work, and it is certainly not only connected to the equity leaders cohort. However, there's a key element about restorative practices happening through a lens of equity, because restorative practices can be biased and lead to the same disparities that we see in other practices historically in education. And so it's really imperative that we don't create that as we're working to infuse more restorative approaches throughout Portland Public Schools. So our goal this year really is around building capacity. And so the equity leaders are actually spending 2 full training of trainers times together, which is a significant amount of time focused on this, really going deep around what are we talking about when we say restorative practices, because there's a lot to that. Understanding definitions and how it's connected to all of our tier 1 strategies. So restorative practices is part of the PBIS, positive behaviors, interventions and supports continuum. It's also connected to the equity work and social emotional learning. And so we really want to make sure that as we build capacity, people understand how those things are connected, and that's complicated. So this is one where we are supported very closely by the Center for Education Equity, and one of the 2 lead people that we've had with our district from the beginning from the Center for Education Equity is Susan Villani. And so she is directly supporting the training and rollout with the equity leaders. She wrote with others, but she really spearheaded the toolkit that the Center for Education Equity just put out, an updated that is a really foundational tool for us moving this work forward. And we're learning a lot as we go too. We're having some really important conversations about the ways in which restorative practices are borrowed, lent, or stolen from Indigenous communities, and the ways that we can acknowledge that and be responsible to that as we work to, build everyone's capacity around them. And so I'm also very excited that Claire Woodman is with us today. So Claire has been a part of the equity cohort since we started, representing Breathe. And Breathe has has deep focus and a lot of folks with expertise around restorative practices. And so Claire was just going to put some voice to that from the Breathe team perspective. And I'm going to stop sharing so you can just see her. Because you don't need that slide, right, Claire? You know your name.
Yeah. I think so. And if I forget, you can remind me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here and listening to the presentation. And as Barrett said, my name is Claire, and I work at the Breathe Day Treatment Program. And I have the pleasure of working alongside a leadership team and a group of staff and teachers and social workers that are deeply grounded in restorative practices. So this training that we had in the fall and the upcoming one in February is one that's very exciting to us. At Breathe, restorative practices are woven into our everyday interventions, and we find that they help to reduce the need for more restrictive interventions. They build relationships, ground people in connection and help to repair harm. For example, today and every day, but today at the high school, we had 2 circles that were wonderful and relaxing, and everybody participated. A million things could be happening, but when we pull together for a circle, everybody relaxes, everybody takes a deep breath, and everybody gets involved. And so that's one of the real beauties of restorative practices. And we at Breathe implement across the continuum, as Barrett has on the slide, from more proactive community building, informal, all the way up to the more formal types of interventions, restorative interventions that allow us to avoid suspensions and other more restrictive interventions. So we're looking forward to the February training. Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks, Claire. So this is the slide that I didn't show yet, but we'll share now. This comes from the toolkit that I was mentioning from the Center for Education Equity. This is just oops, wrong thing. I need slideshow, not this. This comes from that toolkit I was mentioning. This just shows this is one image among many, and this is one that is really helpful, foundational. That's part of what we talked about in that initial training of trainers with the equity cohort, that kind of shows the range of restorative practices and what we're talking about. A lot of times restorative practices gets kind of winnowed into restorative justice, and it only being about juvenile justice response that engages the court system in some way. But restorative practices is actually much broader, and it can look like all of the preventative things we want to see that often are happening in classrooms and advisories throughout the district, where, there's circles where it's just about like checking in, how people are doing, building community, establishing norms in a advisory, all kinds of things. And then it can range all the way to the more formal. So I know some of you have expertise in this area and certainly interest, but that's really just to show you an example of like some of the resources that we utilize. So to not, tell you more than you want to know, to be as succinct as possible, like our next work will be focused around having the equity leaders go deeper around the equity policy. Many of them were part of the work group that helped build the policy. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that staff understand the equity policy. And I think that the equity leaders are going to be the perfect folks to help us do that effectively with the lens that they carry from each of their school buildings and programs. And so I should mention that we're represented by all of our sites, including adult ed, in the equity cohort. And so most schools have a team of folks that take part in the training of trainers. So they have collaborators for how this rolls out at their individual school sites. And then the other thing is that the equity leaders are always, essential in helping reflect on what we did in the past year and what the priorities will be for the coming year. Of course, there's always more priorities than we have time for, because this is just part of our professional learning, right? Like teachers are doing this alongside, all of the other professional learning that they are establishing at the school level and that we as a district name as priorities. So more and more, we want to help people make those things connect more seamlessly and make sure that equity literacy isn't only, isn't a silo only to when we're, quote, talking about equity. But there are some topics that do need a, specific focus and attention. And I think these that I've shared with you about this year are such examples. So I think that's all for me with my favorite GIF. And I will leave it there for any questions or anything that comes up from you all.
Thank you so much, Barrett, and especially for the laugh at the end. Excellent. What questions do board members have? Board Member Burke.
I actually don't have questions. I just have gratitude. Thanks for walking us through that. Thanks for all that you're moving forward and all the ways that you're doing it.
Thank you, Board Member Burke.
Thank you.
Ms. Billiou.
Thank you so much for all of that information. I really appreciate the work you guys are doing, especially around the N-word, because that was a huge traumatic experience when I went to school. So I really appreciate that. And I think it's also something that I would like for you all to, I guess, keep in mind as well, is a lot of times when folks or when teachers create the atmosphere for people to say the N-word when it's written in books, a lot of times they give white students the opportunity to say it too. So it then creates like comfort with them to say it. And it kind of creates that chain of comfort for them as well. So I really appreciate that work. I just had some, I guess, questions. And I also want to offer my services as well. At my day job, I work as a community organizer, and it's something that I am very passionate about. And I want to offer those resources in any way I can, especially around the vagueness of, because I know one of your equity, I forgot what you called them. Yeah, they talked about the vagueness of teachers obviously wanting to do the work, but not knowing how to respond when students of color use that word. So I would love any opportunity to work with you all on that because it's something that I personally personally worked on for a long time. So I would love to give my help in that sense. And you stated that you utilize community orgs to help create equity policies for LGBTQ plus students. I'm wondering if you did that same for anti-racism policy, if you utilize any community organizations that are doing work around this, or any types of folks, because I think, or I guess I'll give some perspective around my personal thoughts on this. I think a lot of times when we're trying to fix issues that are oppressive, systematic issues that are dealing with, or that are people are dealing with personally in a very extreme way, we tend to forget how the resolutions, or we tend to go to white organizations and we tend to look at white orgs to solve those issues and to come up with resolutions. But a lot of times those white organizations are not connected to anybody in that community. They don't have capacity to understand the experience of those members, and they're doing it for money. So I really want to focus on how are we creating concrete policy, and how are we involving the people that are experiencing these into the policy process. If hopefully you caught my question in there. The other thing is kind of along the lines of that as well, of have you also tried to look at BIPOC-led anti-racism organizations like Aorta that that basically specialize on having like Black facilitators or LGBTQ facilitators. Basically, the whole organization is BIPOC-led, and they have a very specific understanding of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, so Aorta is amazing. The Center for Education Equity, I would say, has been our primary resource, in part because they directly offered the things that were named as priorities in the strategic plan. And as our Equity Assistance Center, they are free to us. So we so far have not paid for their support and consultation in now year 5. And it has, and they have the perspective of working throughout the US and in our region. So they're part of an organization called the Center for Education Equity is part of the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium. And they hold the contract from the Department of Education, and it engages a number of other organizations in the work of the Center for Education Equity. So they have been our primary resources in terms of like the district-wide work. But then I would say like a lot of the local organizations are part of, our threads throughout any of the policy work, and certainly in the curriculum work that relates to equity. And so the one example about the LGBTQ organization is just that for that training, I knew that we had just really excellent folks to be able to help us because they had both been involved in the policy writing of the trans and gender expansive students policy. So that was like a direct link to the policy work. So I think you had many other really awesome perspective and questions to offer. And then the other thing I was going to say as it relates to the student facing piece of the N-word guidance, like that is where that needs to go next. And I think it's sometimes hard for staff when we're asking them to focus just on you. And that's a lot of our equity work is like, we're going to talk about our own biases and our own perspective and our own institutional upbringing and what we've learned. And, naturally and rightfully so, teachers are always like, yeah, but what about students? How do I do this with students? Like, and some of those connections happen naturally and some of them need more explicit approaches. And so I would love to talk further with you and others about how that continues to roll out. So I'm sure I missed some questions in there.
I think it would also, Malia, if you don't mind talking a little bit about the engagement with, with the African-American community around the African-American studies curriculum and the Native organizations around the Wabanaki. Because I think that, most of the board is familiar with that, but I do think, to your point, we have tried to truly engage at that level. And I mean, it's consistent with what we talked about earlier with the Latinx community, like, thinking of them as experts in their own experience and, certainly work that we need to continue to do and deepen and do better. But I think, just to help you understand that we are, that is, it's an awareness that we have, and clearly we need to continue to do more of that. Policy work specifically, Barrett talked about, and I think this was the district's first experience with this, was when we passed the gender expansive policy back in 2017, very much had organizations with focus on LGBTQ plus issues, at the table helping to shape it. But maybe Malia, talk a little bit about the examples, and maybe also about the sort of the students in, the level of engagement of students around some of our curriculum work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what your question, the thing you have me reflecting on is the organizations. So I think what we've done is in all of this work, we have been very intentional about thinking about who's at the table advising, or who's creating the table, and then who's there to talk about and advise us. So we have our Wabanaki Studies Advisory Group, who represents all of the tribes in Maine and has been working with us for many years. And that group what happens is that they help make links to other organizations within the community that they know that then we pull in. So like the Abbey Museum, they have links throughout the community that then go beyond just the advising work, but become groups that we might partner with for the development of parts of the curriculum. So I think, I mean, that's been central to the curriculum work. I think with the equity policy, when you were asking that question, I was trying to think about which organizations do we have there. I think we brought individuals, many who have ties to or represent an organization, but we were looking at students and parents and educators and being really intentional about the voices there that were informing and shaping the work. And there's something else you made me think of to say, but so, yeah, I mean, I think it would be good for us to give visibility to that. Oh, this is what I was going to say too. And in all of that, we're being conscious of if we're not partnering with an organization in contract, but working with individuals or making sure we're paying people for their time and their expertise. And the one other thing I was going to say is that something we've started to ask, this shows up more on the curriculum side, is when we're working with an organization to do professional development, asking to see who's their leadership, what are the demographics of their organization and their senior leadership as part of a consideration for who we would be partnering with, if it's not part of our organization already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm coming from obviously a community organizing lens, and it's essentially like a very specific, I've worked with Aorta a bunch of times and they're very concrete. They have, they have like instructions, they have different guidelines for different, how large your organization is, like the different rates too. But I guess we can talk more about this, but I just really want to be deliberate on the aspect of a lot of times when we do get help to create concrete policy, it really is a lot of white folks, and and kind of their sense of equity or their sense of understanding that. And I want to create I guess I want us to work on how do we create opportunity for an organization like Aorta to step in, because I mean, essentially, if we feel like they can deliver this policy a lot better than CEE, and they are going to be more understanding of this issue, then I would rather choose that than the other folks, because we have that resource. So that's essentially what I'm saying is. If they've done workshop on immigrant communities and like how to be more sensitive to their identities. So I guess I'm talking, I mean, Bay knows what their capacity is. So I'm essentially talking about how deep they go into a lot of these issues. And that's the lens I want us to be thinking about them in.
Yeah. And one thing too, I totally hear you and agree. And I think it's particularly important for us because our staff is overwhelmingly white.
Yeah.
And so we're very aware of that in terms of decision making. And so I think that's something that we think and talk a lot about. But maybe one idea is by perhaps creating more transparency into the advisory teams and organizations, it probably gives opportunity for people who have other organizations they know and connect to help us see if there are organizations and partners in the community that we're not partnering with and working with that have the expertise. So that's something, I can definitely follow up.
I will follow up and I will do my homework and see how helpful I can be.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bondo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Barrett, for the amazing report and summary. And thank you to Claire and Aine, because this is, I think, what we did when we drafted the equity policy last year. And I think the most important part for me was the culture inclusion when we've been talking about the professional development. And then everything that I see so far is that all the work side and we've been doing is just so interconnected with the core instructions. Then Maria and the team just, presented last time, because those are the way we can see the way the professional development really is a major key to try to advance the strategy learning on the different aspects to the core instruction. But I'm kind of in the wonder about so different challenges, because this is the equity policy just passed last year. And I heard about what Claire just mentioned about some conversation to be uncomfortable. And I know we have most of our teachers are the same race, are white. So I try to understand how do we present and balance the conversation, because it's not like we need to say that all of them are just, applaud and are positive to move the policy, the equity policy and professional development going forward. Because it's about change. It's about you stepping out of your comfort zone. You used to teach that way all the time, and that's the way you've been all the time using your core instruction, your curriculum. So either way we will balance with the teachers or staff who are really uncomfortable and rejected that. How do we balance those professional development moving forward? Because we need to be honest and transparency to understand that some of the teacher we say is a wasting of the time, because they need to be focused on the education for all our students. And without knowing that when we're moving forward, we're working for all the students. So that professional development with equity policy is really aligning to the cultural inclusion that we want to see, that all our students feel welcome and comfortable so they can be able to thrive. But we have a step to go. So I just want to understand, do you have any plan or strategy or be aware about those challenges may be facing in front of you? So how we balance those conversations?
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, you touched.
I was going to say, that's like stuff I think about all the time. Is just how do we continue to help bring everyone along? A couple of things your question and framing made me think about is like, one is it's part of like why this is connected to the hiring work, and why I work closely with Barb Stoddard and improving the way we hire, because we want to hire people and retain people who are equity literate and committed to these things and understand how it is as essential as anything else they do to build those relationships effectively, cross-culturally, with humility and all of that. I think it's also what comes to mind with your thoughts is that we've also done explicit professional development about having difficult conversations, and that we're going to need to continue to revisit and reset on that. But restorative practices is also a way we have difficult conversations. It's also a way we can sit in circle or be accountable to one another and to say, I think that there's a different way to do this, or that was a problem, the way this was handled, and to have honest conversations with one another. So those are just some of the things that you're very great question. You ask very good questions, Ms. Bondo. It made me think about all of those things at once. And, I think it's something that's going to require ongoing attention to do. Because it can't just happen through professional development, though that is, by being explicit about it, that's one way that we're getting at it, but it's not, it's not the only piece.
Exactly. All right. We keep up with that. Thank you so much. It's a lot to be is a lot. Then I think the step then we're going forward is the good step, is just the best step now we're going. And I know then at least we need to be aware about what we're facing and taking that one into consideration as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bondo. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much, Barrett and equity leaders for sharing about your work. It's really exciting to learn about what's happening on the ground. I just had a question, Barrett, and I'm sorry if you did share this, but I know you mentioned that equity leaders are in all the buildings, right? So this is happening across our buildings. So, and I know this is all in development, but I just was trying to understand like the topics that leaders are bringing and then kind of who's attending them, like just to kind of understand, like, is it kind of of the topics that you shared for professional development, like are equity leaders choosing one of those and then that's how it's being brought, and then kind of who's coming to, can you just help with like kind of where it's at right now and maybe what the vision of what maybe you're hoping it will look like will be?
So this is all required professional development district wide. What that looks like at the school level is nuanced and, and should be, because the equity leaders with their administrators really should plan based on what the, how to make it tie in at the school site level. Okay. But there are equity leaders at every school site with the exception of Peaks. I'm the Peaks equity leader. Given how small their staff is, it's really challenging to have them send someone. So I support the Peaks team. And so folks come and then do turnaround trainings. Now, given the realities of COVID and just that things are a bit more challenging in the last 2 years in particular, this year and last year, the topics we decide at a district level, what are the topics we're going to do that year. In theory, those are the ones that are directly kind of done for turnaround trainings at the school level. I would say the last year that is a little less rigid, just based on just how complicated everything is. So those topics I shared on the earlier slide, those are all of the things that have happened since 2018 when we launched this. And this year, the focus of these 4 trainings, hopefully at every school, that's turning, that means that there's 3 or 4 turnaround trainings based on those 3 or 4 topic areas. Things get delayed. Sometimes folks push things to the following year, but then the equity leaders, can still present that. I hope that answers your question. In terms of logistics.
Just one little thing to that. Barrett, that was great, but just two things that I wanted to add to that. When we launched the Equity Leaders Cohort and the professional development series as a district, we started with a really diverse group of folks from across the district. And one of the conversation topics was whether or not to make the professional development optional. And there were many perspectives that it should be, because if people are coming in without a mindset of wanting to engage in the professional learning, that it wouldn't be as meaningful. And we made a very deliberate choice that this is not optional PD, that to work in this district, we need a common language, we need a common understanding, and that this is required learning for all of us. Even people who've been exposed to this learning, there's always a deeper understanding. And then you're learning and talking about it with new colleagues, perhaps, and in a different context. So I guess I just want to say that this is, so any of the district-wide trainings are considered required training. We do take exit ticket data, so that does help us gauge, attendance and what people are taking away and their feedback. And then the second thing I was going to say is just about our school leaders. So we've been in every retreat we've had since the launch of the Portland Promise, I guess I would say, we carve out a large majority of our retreat time to do equity literacy type work with our leadership team. Sometimes we try to launch something we're going to do with the equity leaders, with our school leaders first. So Barrett, I'm thinking about the MAP exercise that we rolled out with school leaders, and then we had everybody do that across the district. But that would be the other thing I would say, is that that's a huge focus for us as well, because obviously the leaders are setting the tone and doing that work that Ms. Bonda was talking about in terms of managing when things are challenging. And so that's just another piece of it. So then schools are doing a lot of additional things because it's, kind of because the equity leaders are going above and beyond. But I just wanted to make sure it was clear that this was very deliberate, our decision to make it required, and that we are also really tending to the school leaders' time and professional learning above and beyond these district-wide learnings.
Thank you. I did think that was the case, but that's really helpful clarification. And thank you for clarifying kind of, that was really helpful, like what, and also I was thinking about during COVID, like how is this happening too? So I appreciate the intention, and then that buildings are following through with these as they can. So thank you so much.
During COVID, it's been different. You know, we're virtual with each other, but I would say I've been amazed with the cohort and the incredible ability of folks to like really still feel like they're in a room together, having really deep, nuanced, complicated conversations about all of these topics, and thinking critically about how they're going to, turn that around for their schools. So we've been meeting on Zoom, because that's the safest way to bring the cohort is quite large. I should have said in the beginning, we have, about 70 people who are part of cohort teams across the district. And then we have lead facilitators for each school. That is a smaller group, just to help be responsible for ensuring, things follow through, and that there's continuity of representation. So, yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Are there other questions or feedback from the board? I'll just say that, for me, this model is so powerful to know that there's equity cohort leaders in every building, and it sounds like in many of our programs, and the train the trainer model, to know that this decentralized model, the longevity of it in terms of how we can affect change, not just now, but over time. And we know that this work is so urgent, but also ongoing. And this model, to me, is really powerful. So I just want to thank you, Barrett, and to thank all of our equity cohort members and school leaders among the equity cohort. I'm so appreciative for this work. I love this update. I hope you come and report back to us as often as possible, because this is a real bright spot. So thank you so much. I don't know, Superintendent, if you had anything else on this.
No, just to thank obviously Barrett, but also Claire and Ina and Meg for their contributions, and for representing what is an amazing team of people who are dedicating their time to make sure that we're moving this work at the school level. So just thank you guys for being here late after your already long day. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. So that concludes our board focuses tonight. Thank you again to everyone who joined us. And as the superintendent said, on top of your already long days, recognizing that it is almost 9:30. We are going to move now to old business. We have 4 different items to consider, and we're going to start with consideration and action to approve the appointment of Yusuf as co-chair of the District Building Advisory Committee. Is there a motion? Board Member Burke, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to speak to this motion?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to speak to all of them, together, just so that there's the full context of it, much of which you already heard before, but just to do that for members of the public who might be watching, as well as for the record. So we have a series of appointments associated with our public engagement around our Buildings for the Future school renovations program. As you know, we have 3 actions that you're being asked to consider regarding the District Advisory Building Committee, and 1 regarding the Building Level Advisory Committee. First, regarding the DABC. The DABC is an 11-member committee that advises the board on direction and process around the overall project. The DABC is made up of 3 elected board members, 2 elected city councilors, and 6 members of the public. The elected officials are appointed by the board based on a recommendation of the board chair, which you have in front of you. The councilors are selected by the board chair in consultation with the city council. The committee is co-chaired by one of the members of the school board selected by the board chair from among the board representatives on the DABC, and co-chaired by a member of the council also selected by the board chair. The 6 members of the public are at large and were appointed by the board in 2018. They continue to serve on the committee for as long as they remain a resident of Portland and continue to wish to serve. And any vacancies among members of the public are filled by the school board based on a recommendation from the board's appointment committee. So board chair Figdor today is proposing the following leadership appointments. Board member Youssef to replace board member Sarah Thompson as chair of the DABC, and is Chair Figdor is also recommending that board member Youssef serve as co-chair of the DABC, also replacing Ms. Thompson. And he will co-chair along with Councilor Mark Dion, who has served as the other co-chair for the past year. Additionally, Councilor April Fernier is being recommended to replace former Councilor Belinda Ray. Finally, based on your actions earlier today as an appointments committee, you're also being asked to approve Sarah Thompson to replace outgoing DABC member Brad Post, who, as you heard earlier, resigned in November. Just for those who are joining late, Ms. Thompson's appointment required approval by the Appointments Committee, and the Appointments Committee this year is the board as a committee of the whole. And our meeting tonight began with a meeting of the Appointments Committee to formalize that recommendation. So next, you will also be asked to address the Building Level Advisory Committee. You will recall that the resolution that you approved at the last meeting included the reconstitution of the BLAC away from a set of separate committees, one for each school, into a single committee. This serves the dual purpose of streamlining the work at a time when there's a lot on everyone's plate, and more importantly, recognizes that at this stage of the process, these projects are inextricably linked together, and that any individual discussion involving the parameters of one school have implications for the other two. So since the last meeting, Board Chair Figdor, as you heard earlier, in the Appointments Committee, was in contact with current members, BLAC members, to communicate about these changes, engage their interest in continuing to serve. And the slate of candidates before you today are all previously appointed members of the individual BLACs who are interested and committed to continuing that service. I will also note that there are up to 3 staff members from each school who serve on the BLAC, and I am in the process of verifying continuing staff membership, and will be making my appointments shortly. So that's a summation of everything. So I was hoping that we could just do it in one fell swoop, and then we would be able to just move forward with questions and board comments on each of those actions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. So we're first going to move forward with the motion on the table now, which is the appointment of Mr. Youssef as a member and co-chair of the District Advisory Building Committee. Are there any questions on the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on this appointment? So adding Mr. Youssef as both a member and the co-chair of the District Advisory Building Committee. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? All right, I would just say that I want to thank Mr. Youssef for stepping up and filling this role, both joining the committee and agreeing to co-chair the committee. I'm excited for your leadership, and this continues to be a really important committee in terms of stewarding the remaining 3 projects forward there are in, any major construction project, hurdles along the way, and we're going to need your leadership as we've already encountered a lot of them, and we're going to need your leadership to continue to ensure that the projects move forward as expeditiously as possible. So thank you so much for stepping up and being willing to serve in this role. So with that, please, Mr. Superintendent, will you call the roll? We're going to vote on action to approve the appointment of Mr. Youssef as a member and co-chair of the District Advisory Building Committee.
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Wando?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliu?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So it is unanimous. Congratulations, Mr. Youssef. And I should say that's unanimous with our student voting with the majority. And thank you again so much, Mr. Youssef. Now we're moving on to consideration and action to approve the appointment of Councilor April Fournier to fill the city councilor vacancy on the District Building Advisory Committee. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Board Member Burke. Are there any questions on the appointment? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on this appointment of Councilor Fournier to the District Advisory Building Committee? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. And is there any board discussion? Yes, Board Member Burke.
Just friendly, if you could, Nyla seconded that before I did.
Oh, yeah, you missed me. Rude.
Indicate that, and then just
Sorry.
say
Thank you for the correction.
Yeah, of course. Gratitude to April for stepping forward to co-chair this as well. I'm looking forward to her and Yusuf's leadership on moving this all forward.
Excellent. Is there any other board discussion? And I did see the superintendent made that correction. So sorry, Ms. Biliu. I will just say that I'm really grateful to Councilor Fournier for stepping up and filling this role. I know she's very busy and is juggling a lot. And so I'm deeply appreciative. She's been a supporter of these projects from the very beginning. And I know as a counselor has looked for an opportunity to help play a role. And so I'm really appreciating that desire to work with us to bring these projects to fruition. So with that, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve of the appointment of Councilor April Fournier to fill the city councilor vacancy on the District Advisory Building Committee. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Wando?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliu?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So it is unanimous. Ms. Fournier has been appointed to the DABC with our student voting with the majority. Next, we are on to consideration and action to approve the appointment of Sarah Thompson to fill the community member vacancy on the District Advisory Building Committee. Is there a motion? Ms. Biliu? Seconded by Ms. Russell Better. Are there any questions on this appointment? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on this appointment of Sarah Thompson to serve in the role of a community member on the District Advisory Building Committee? Seeing none, I'm going to go close public comment and go to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll just say that I'm grateful to Ms. Thompson for continuing to serve in her capacity now as a community member to see these projects through. She's been involved for many, many years in this work. So we'll appreciate her history and continued involvement. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving the appointment of Sarah Thompson to fill the community member vacancy on the District Advisory Building Committee. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes. So it is unanimous with our student voting with the majority. Ms. Thompson has been added to as a community member on the District Advisory Building Committee. And last, we are moving to consideration and action to approve the Appointments Committee nominations for community members to serve as members of the newly formed district-wide building level advisory committee. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef?
Second.
A second.
Seconded by Ms. Biliu. Are there any questions on the nomination? Would anyone like me to read the slate of nominees again? Okay, I'm seeing nods that isn't needed.
And it is in the packet.
It is
It's
absolutely in the
there for
packet.
record as well.
Yes. Okay. So seeing no questions, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on this slate of nominees to fill the community seats on the new district-wide building level advisory committee? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll just say that I'm very much appreciative of all of these members of the public who have served on individual building level advisory committees and are now continuing their involvement and expanding it in a new way to serve with members of other communities to see these 3 projects forward. And to do so amid a pandemic when many of us are squeezed in terms of our time and pressures and the like. So thank you to all of these members in the community who are willing to continue to serve and to serve in this new capacity. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the Appointments Committee nomination for community members to serve as members of the reconstituted Building Level Advisory Committee. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so it is unanimous with our student voting with the majority. This slate of community members is now approved to join the Building Level Advisory Committee. So that concludes our old business, and we have no new business tonight. So we are moving on to personnel items. Consideration and action to approve the appointment of teacher candidates, 1 year only. Is there a motion?
I move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Board Member Burke. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion?
No comments. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much. Are there questions from the board? There's no public comment on personnel items, so we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve of the appointment of teacher candidates 1 year only positions. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, although I am running out of columns here. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes. So it is unanimous with our students voting with the majority. And next is consideration and action to approve the appointment of teacher candidates, probationary. Is there a motion? Board Member Burke, seconded by Board Member Russell Better. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, there is no public comment on personnel items, so we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the appointment of teacher candidates probationary. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Billiou,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figner.
Yes, so it is unanimous with our student voting with the majority. So that concludes our work for tonight. Before we adjourn, I want to note that our next meeting is on February 1st at 6 p.m. We'll be meeting in a blended format here at Casco Bay as well as on Zoom. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Board Member Burke, seconded by Mr. Youssef. All in favor, just with a show of hands? It is unanimous, and we are adjourned at 9:39 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone, for your work tonight. Have a good rest of your night.